I had seen Maveth's reading, so I knew there could be potential over 100. I just never thought that I would see my attributes that high. Elven artificers crafted the tablet table, but it copied the design for human physiology. It was my understanding that 100 was the highest possible score. Yet there was a 101 after my space affinity. Maybe magic affinities didn't follow the same rules. What this meant was my spell form was 3 more points powerful, which accounted for my larger dimensional space. It also meant that people and creatures would have a harder time resisting it. I reviewed my other attributes before wiping the reader. By far, the most beautiful number was the improvement in my channeling attribute. Looking over my magical stats, Aether shaping was still limiting me from casting true spells. Obtaining essences for Aether shaping was problematic. I had copied most of the bestiary from the library, and only a few beasts even noted what essences were likely to be formed using a collector on them. Not a single creature so far noted the shaping attribute as a likely essence formed with a collector. Well, that was not true. Dragon eggs yielded the essence about a quarter of the time, but then you would have to deal with an irate mama dragon. This meant using a collector on a mage was the only recourse to get a shaping essence. Still, my review of the bestiary was incomplete, so I would hold out hope to find a reasonable creature that could yield the shaping essence. Maybe not in this library, but perhaps another. Even without being able to cast true spells, I thought I was doing well for myself. My other weak attribute was ether resistance. This attribute helped me resist etheric magic's influence on me. I have been targeted twice recently, once by Mage Ona, and once by Cassian. I think the only thing that saved me with Ona was the distance we were apart, and if Zyna was right, and she was getting the Charm Affinity amulet, I would have to be careful around her. I sent the tablet reader table to my space. If I were called away to Hounds training, I didn't want to risk leaving it behind. I was feeling good about my progress, and I took the rest of the night to page through the last of the books from Caelora. Around midnight I deposited these books inside the makeshift wall safe. Even though my dimensional space had increased, I wanted as much space available as possible. I did keep one book. It detailed the construction of fine elven chainmail, using flattened diamond-shaped links that fit together seamlessly. The resulting chainmail fit like a heavy shirt, but when impacted, the individual links locked together, dispersing the blow across a wide area. The links were supposed to be made from a metal called mithril, but the only place I knew the metal existed was in the shimmering labyrinth. It was probably a nightmare for a smith to create, but I thought to leave it as a parting gift for Ignis. If I didn't lose my dreamscape amulet, I would have access to the tome myself, as it was already copied there. I cleaned the kitchen and secured my room before entering the dreamscape. I spent some time with Oscar, and then studying the void spell form for Purify Self. Once I joined the Hounds, I didn't plan to use the amulet other than to enter for a few minutes to create 10 or so books every night. I walked to the center of the sandy scorpion room, and Constantine and Xavier followed, understanding my intentions. "Going to fight the orcs again? How about a white tonight?" Constantine asked eagerly, holding his runic weapon. "Not tonight. I have a new member to add to our collective." I focused on everything that had happened today with Cassian, all the weapons, all the instructions he gave, and the exchanges we had in training for over 12 hours. The gladiator stood before me, dressed in the combat gear I had first seen him in at the Colosseum. His confident visage studied me as a pressing headache formed behind my eyes. I was glad I had not made any books tonight before adding Cassian. "Have you changed your mind then?" he asked suggestively. I hadn't changed the essence of what I knew of him. Now that he was created, I could alter his personality, but it shouldn't be necessary. "No, stick to instructing me, and let's keep our interactions focused on improving my weapons skills." I fought through the migraine to create the same weapons racks available in the gladiator training yard around the circular chamber. I sunk the large scorpion into the sand out of sight. Constantine immediately started walking the lengths on racks. "This is more like it." He tested a pilum and threw it into the wall. It pierced the shell of a snail before falling to the sand, the snail dead. Cassian sighed at my rejection and looked around at people. "I do perform better in front of larger crowds. Can you add a few more?" I interrupted the gladiator. "Maybe in time. But for now, this is everyone. Let's start with spear practice." My black-tipped spear manifested in my hand, and I stepped toward Cassian. When I left the dreamscape, It was an hour or so before sunrise. The practice had been intense, and I was surprised by how much my subconscious brain had picked up during the training session during the day. It was clear the amount of information was what had caused the migraine, which was still lingering even now. My body was sore and achy, and I didn't want to get out of bed this morning. I could have used my etheric healing, but I hesitated. Without my etheric channels burning, I felt like I needed some pain in the background to keep my focus. Had I become masochistic? I went through a mixture of stretches and yoga on the balcony as the city woke below me. I could see why legionnaires would continue serving on after finishing their term to be employed by first citizens, although probably Zyna's treatment of me and her accommodations was more of an exception rather than the rule. Zyna was already gone as she didn't answer her door when I called breakfast ready. I spent my morning in the kitchen preparing food and drink to store in my space. I added more burritos, meat buns, squeezed a few gallons of blood orange juice, and baked loaves of caramel bread. I had gotten a few crates of blood oranges by mistake, and they were going to go to waste, but I managed to get 5 gallons of juice and chilled it before storing it in my space. When the noon bell resounded, I was expecting Rena, but she didn't show. I had descended the tower to find it curiously mostly empty. No one was in the libraries or classrooms. I stopped a passing servant. Everyone is in the banquet hall for the assembly. They will be there through the evening meal. Why? What is happening? It is an early graduation for some, but the Emperor and Chancellors will be speaking. Then they are clearing out the dorms for the next class a little early. Kind of their final meal, he snorted. As he left, I wondered why Zyna had not told me. Was Rena being sent away? Rather than try to find this assembly, I pushed my way into the bestiary library. As expected, the uptight curator was not present. It was always better to ask for forgiveness than permission. I picked up where I had left off and finished the modest library before anyone disturbed me. I was surprised the sun had set when I climbed the winding stairs. I was becoming concerned as it had been almost a day since I had seen Zyna. Also, the truth was longing to spend some time with Rena. It almost felt like everyone had forgotten about me. There was no point in preparing dinner, so I spent the night in the alchemy lab. I finally heard the door to Zyna's room and went to question her. She was pouring herself a glass of wine and looked tired, her eyes sunken slightly. "How was the assembly?" I asked, pouring myself a glass. One sip and I put down the acidic wine. "A bunch of old wizards pretending they're still important." She waved her hands dismissively. "I would have come to get you, but you would have just had to stand in a row with other legionnaires for hours." "I heard the Emperor was there," I replied cautiously. She huffed. "No, he rarely attends, and it is better as he cannot hold himself together for such a long time." I nodded slowly. I decided to be direct. "Will I see Rena again?" "I can't tell who is more smitten, you or the girl," Zyna cajoled. I didn't respond to her teasing. "Yes, ye will be by tomorrow after midday." She sighed and more seriously said, "Livia has left the city to go to Gisedmuria with the Antonia's emissaries. Things are moving quickly," was all I could say. Zyna just nodded solemnly. My impression was she thought the expedition would not succeed and may not even arrive. I asked a few questions about the banquet. It was a show for the mages and failed aspirants. It was to show them they were valued in the Empire before being assigned elsewhere. Rena still had too much potential untapped to graduate. I left Zyna in the kitchen, drinking wine. By her mood, that might not be the only bottle tonight. I followed my routine through the morning. When Rena finally arrived after midday, she rushed into me. She was wearing the orc short sword and hadn't belted it well among her robes, as it pressed uncomfortably into me. Still, we ignored the discomfort. Rena was directing me toward my room that was off the kitchen, but I stopped her. Later. For now, I need to teach you to use this. You don't even have it looped and strapped in the belt properly." The sword lesson was extremely handsy, but Rena didn't mind if it encouraged it. I still felt it was my duty to prepare her as best as possible, so I kept getting her focused on the simple sword forms. She wasn't going to be a swordswoman in an afternoon. I thought if she was assigned to lead a company, she could always have her legionnaires continue her training. "If I am a mage commander, why cannot I just have you be one of my legionnaires?" she complained when I suggested it. "We don't always get to make the decisions, Rena. If you never want to be told what to do, become the Empress." I was being snide, but Rena took the words and mentally chewed on them. I shook my head and got her focused on footwork again. Even if she never became a great swordswoman, it was good exercise, and she had the perfect sword for her ability level. The sun was fading outside, and Rena dragged me into the baths. Zyna said, I have to leave at dark. It is my turn to choose what we do. I didn't resist. The next 3 days were the same. We spent our afternoons training with blades, with a rushed session of intimacy in the baths before she left. I had taken a number of essences in the evening, using all my quickness and earth essences and the one remaining channeling essence. I didn't see Zyna much, but I always left her dinner. I knew she was giving Rena and me privacy because our ephemeral affair could end at any moment. I secured my room that evening and settled into the dreamscape. I deflected Constantine's decoy strike with my shield and used my air shield to hamper Cassian on my left. I needed to isolate one of them and get a killing blow. Maveth and Zarana encouraged me on as I was pressed back, leaving air shields in my wake. Cassian wanted a cheering gallery complied, but they were cheering for me, not him. Oscar barked encouragement as well. Then Cassian cheated, using his foot to kick up sand to show the air shields he couldn't see. Even with my improved ether capacity, they were wearing me down. I dropped my shield to use the black-tipped spear two-handed. It greatly increased my speed and control. I caught Constantine diagonally across the face. His eye was destroyed and a flap of his cheek hung. Cassian used my focus on Constantine to move in, but I expected I was suddenly in my bed. The crude pulley system I worked in the door and window had pulled the amulet out of my hand. After Zyna had bypassed the locks, I jury-rigged the system. The door thudded into the wedge on the floor, stopping it just a few inches open. I rolled to my feet, sending the amulet to storage and grabbing the unsheathed orc's torment leaning nearby. I put on my helm and kneeling, I sent an earth speak pulse into the stone floor to see how many enemies I faced. A single man was at the door, trying to press it softly forward, but the wedge caught it, and just his fingers were visible. Another man stood relaxed a few paces back. Cornelius' voice broke the tense air. I would have knocked, but I didn't want to disturb your rest. That made no sense. It is midnight. Can this wait till morning? I asked, sounding annoyed. But I was on edge. Maybe they decided I was not needed for their plans, and this was an assassination. The old hound chuckled. We always take the pups at midnight. Usually I get to surprise and awaken them unpleasantly, but you are spoiling my fun. He let out a long manufactured sigh of disappointment. I will wait in the common room. Gather your things, leave your armor. You are no longer legionnaire. You are now a pup. If you grow some fangs, I will name you a hound. 5 minutes and we depart. I looked over the small room. I got my boots on and picked up a small pack and 2 letters. Cornelius looked surprised as I exited in less than a minute. I am ready. I just want to leave these in the kitchen. I put the pack in the cold larder and the 2 letters on the table. One was addressed to Rena, and the other to Zyna. Then I descended the tower with Cornelius and the hound accompanying him. Zyna retired to her apartments after another meeting for the city's defense. Telha was on the tributary, and its expansive docks on the river and sea made it difficult to defend. The city had long relied on being too large to effectively attack or capture, with nearly 500,000 souls within its walls, twice the population of the next biggest city on the continent. Thousands of retired pensioned legionnaires and soldiers within would also answer the call to defend the walls. Even now, agents of the Empire were visiting them and making sure their armor and weapons were ready when called upon. They were being told they would not be ordered to march, only to defend the walls of Telha. Zyna knew that was a lie. If things got desperate, the Emperor would break that promise. Zyna appeared in her room, the teleport bracer sending electric shocks through her body. She sat in front of the mirror to get her hair under control. She inhaled deeply, and there was no odor of cooking food in the air. She sighed and walked into the kitchen and paused. All was quiet, and no food was ready for her. Cornelius had finally come for him last night. She had admonished herself for lusting after the young man, but his otherworlder naivete, carefree demeanor, and amazingly focused work ethic stirred dormant emotions in her. She had acted like a lusty teen after watching a stallion take a mare. She had never planned to have another child and locked away her desires, no matter how many times the Emperor solicited a potential suitor for her. Eric also reminded her of her lover when she was a mage commander. Taurus had the same wavy black hair, always had a stupid grin, and never took anything too seriously. Taurus had been her first shield advisor and was twice her age when she took over the company. He was the only son of a minor baron who was too poor to pay for his son's first citizenship. Taurus volunteered for the Legion, hoping to claim a pension one day and take over his father's small estate on the coast. In their years together, Taurus guided her on leadership and so much more. It was not uncommon for female mage commanders to seek pleasure from their men. Due to Zyna's powerful fire affinity and spell arsenal, she had been given an experienced company of legionnaire volunteers to protect her. Zyna ravaged the Empire's enemies with her firestorms. As they traveled across the Empire in their duty, Taurus' father passed, and his estate was seized by the Duke of the province for taxes owed. Zyna promised him they would regain his father's estate and raise a family after they completed her service. They eventually had a daughter, Mila. While Mila was young, Zyna was assigned to the Mage College as an instructor. Her legionnaires were stripped from her and reassigned as she had no need of them at the college. As Mila grew, Taurus and Zyna's plans to marry cemented. Then, the Emperor decided it was time to push back the trolls in the Agorian swamp. Taurus' new mage commander perished with all his men in a failed sortie deep into the swamps. When Zyna learned of his death, she went into a rage and portaled to the Agorian swamp, and burned everything she could, frequently coming close to burning her ether channels, but enjoying the warning pains throughout her body when she got close. Hundreds of trolls died to her rage, and only the connection to Mila kept her from sacrificing herself in her wrath. It was not long before the trolls hid in underground burrows and refused to venture forth in fear of the Empire's Fire Witch. The Emperor named her High Mage of Fire, raised her to First Citizen for her service, and gave her Taurus' father's barony. Still, resentment lingered for her. The Empire had ordered her lover to his death. Baroness Zyna moved to the tiny barony on the coast to raise their daughter. She retired from the Mage Academy, and the years were good on the northern coast. Mila was like her father, always grinning and loving life. It saddened her when she took her tablet testing at 16, and she was found powerful in both fire and celestial magic. Mila went excitedly to the Mage College, and all too soon, she was commanding her own mage company of legionnaires. Mila sought to make her mother and father proud, but instead she was killed 2 years later, when the Emperor sent her company to repel the goblin hordes in the south. It was one of the worst surges in a century, and more soldiers, legionnaires, and mages should have been sent to confront it. But the Emperor was too fearful the Barteradians would take advantage on the eastern border. The loss of Mila was the end for her. She had lost her love and precious innocent daughter. Antonia found her soon after, and it did not take much time to convince her that the Empire needed change. Zyna reached the kitchen to find 2 letters. One was addressed to her, and one to Rena. She opened hers first. The near-perfect penmanship read, "Zyna, I truly appreciate everything you've done for me. I can't express how grateful I am, and I really hope we'll always remain friends. I've cooked dinner for you and put it in the larder, and there's a little package waiting there too. I left some essences for Rena, and would appreciate if you could pass them along to her. Plus, there's a book for Ignacio, and I stumbled upon some mage robes that I think a certain elven summoner may have left behind. You can consider those a small gift from me, in appreciation for your help." Eric, that little weasel, Zyna smirked. You'd have more of Treljorn's possessions. Other than uncovering the tablet reader, Zyna had respected his space. She had only entered his small room that one time because she was shocked that Eric had chosen one of the smallest rooms in the suite. There were large, opulent guest rooms he could have occupied. She marched into the cold larder, and her jaw dropped. Large jars labeled appleberry jam were on the shelf. A dozen caramel loaves were frozen and just needed to be heated, and large strips of meat hung. He must have emptied his dimensional space and left her everything he had left from the dungeon. It was a pity the etheric bleed would ruin the restorative properties in a week. The bag he mentioned was relatively easy to find. She opened it to find a small bag with an apex and minor air essence. Did he get these in the dungeon as well? Maybe in a reward chest. Zyna hoped Rena appreciated the magnitude of the gift. Any apex affinity essence carried immense value among the first citizens. A heavy tome was on top, and this must be the book for Ignis. Her Elvish was terrible, and she couldn't grasp the faded title. She paged through the smithing book, not thinking much of it, but paused as the illustrations clarified what this was. It was a step-by-step instruction manual for creating the mythical elven chain mail. She had seen the fantastical chain shirts in person, which were worth a king's ransom. However, working the mythical mithril was incredibly difficult. The fool boy could have sold this book and lived in luxury in any kingdom on Dizia. She shook her head, closing the book. She would give this to Ignis after the emperor had been deposed. Otherwise, Ignis might get too distracted with trying to create the chain shirt herself. She pulled the last item in the pack out and unfurled the bundle in the bottom. She tested it with her ether, and the robe shimmered as she held it. These were Traeliorn's robes. Zyna had owned very few artifacts over her decades. This was partly due to her modest funds and lack of interest in such objects. She examined the robes in detail as she searched for damage or blood. Nothing. They were as pristine as if they were new. If Traeliorn owned them, then there should be more to them. He was one of the most powerful mages on the continent. She carefully folded the robes and packed them away. She trusted a few mages who could use a revelation scroll on them. She would have to be patient and wait for the opportunity to broach the subject with Chancellor Evander. Yes, she decided. He would be fascinated by them if they were as powerful as she suspected, and keep the secret. The only danger in wearing them was that someone from the Barteradian kingdom might recognize them as belonging to Traeliorn. Zyna found some frozen meat buns Eric had left for her, and took them out to heat. It took some time to figure out the thermal stone on the oven. Even though she had repaired it for Eric, this was the first time she had used it. An hourglass was nearby, and she took it into the common room to read while she waited. She had been reading up on the last war with the orcs of the Bhutan Caliphate. She wanted to make sure she understood their preferred tactics of the war clerics and warlords if they did try to besiege the capital. Zyna paused and resisted, showing surprise as she entered the common room. Antonia was seated on the sofa, sipping some tea. "Did he make it to training safely?" Zyna asked. A little concerned Antonia's unannounced visit meant something happened to Eric. "The boy is fine. Did you learn anything about his origins while he was under your roof?" Antonia said while studying the fire mage. "No, we never talked about it." Zyna moved and sat across from Antonia and crossed her legs to get comfortable. Antonia frowned. "The agents I sent to the village where he appeared didn't find any signs of other otherworlders." Zyna arched her eyebrow. "Is that a problem? He could be lying." "All the records of otherworlders have them arrive in groups," Antonia stated flatly. Zyna shook her head. "I am certain he is not from Dizia. He is a terrible actor when it comes down to it. He is as readable as this book." Zyna placed the book on the cushion next to her. Antonia studied the book's title with her eyes dancing quickly. "The Supreme Cleric will not attack Telha directly. My agents within the Caliphate borders are certain they will attack in the west." Silence hung for a moment before Antonia asked, "Were you aware he visited the Adventurers Guild in the lower city?" Zyna's mind raced as her face remained impassive. "I was aware. He has been experimenting with alchemy and sought some potions there." Zyna cursed Eric for putting her in a position of lying for him. "Why didn't he just ask her?" Antonia nodded. "That follows what I learned. He spent some time in their procurement room. He is either a terrible actor, as you say, or brilliant, and has all of us fooled. He isn't hardened like most legionnaires. I would know if he was deceiving us." Zyna defended him, which caused Antonia's brow to rise in surprise. Antonia seemed to be weighing something in her mind. "Do you have the blood sample?" Zyna pursed her lips, but slowly nodded as she went into her room and retrieved a tunic with dry blood in a hole above her heart. Antonia looked at it and nodded. "Good, good." Was he aware the blood samples from conscripts are never sent to the archive? Antonia proceeded to fold the garment carefully. "No," Zyna replied tersely. "Only those with a lineage who volunteered for the Legion had their blood archived with the mages. It became convenient for the Empire to let everyone think all legionnaires could be cursed with abyssal magic, or tracked with blood samples." Zyna knew Antonia had requested this sample as insurance. She was risking a lot with her faith in Eric and placing him so close to Centurion Sergius. "Good. Duke Octavian will supply 14 loyal legionnaires when we move on the Emperor. I have 2 more mages, in addition to Castile, to support you as well," Antonia stated with finality. Zyna stopped her. I still think it is a mistake placing Octavian on the throne. If Castile learns about it, she will not aid us, and it is her ability that is most needed to succeed. Then she better not find out, Antonia said forcefully. Duke Octavian will not wear the crown long anyway. Focus on what you need to do. When the Emperor leaves the palace, we will gather the collaborators and move. Do you know when that will be yet? Zyna narrowed her eyes. He plans to march to the greatest threat with 1,000 Imperial Legionnaires and 10,000 soldiers supported by more than 24 mage companies. Whether it is the Orcs, Elves, or Barteradians, I do not know. He has built massive defenses around the Titan ruins but seems ready to cede the Western Empire to the Orcs to keep his hold of the ruins. Antonia's eyes moved rapidly as she thought. It is too soon. Delay him. Tell him you will march with him, but he must not march until I have everyone in position. If we fail, it will be the end of us and probably the Empire. If he's clear-headed enough to heed my advice, I will do everything in my power, Zyna declared with a bitter taste in her mouth. She was too far down this path to change her mind. It was her hope that replacing the Emperor would prevent the Empire from collapsing under its own hubris. Good, Antonia stood. I need 3 mages capable of imprinting the spell form for sending messages. The new class of plebeians should start arriving soon. Here is a list of names Constantin sent me with a high enough affinity in air magic to learn it. Hasten their imprinting process and prepare to send them to me when it is done. Antonia didn't wait for Zyna to respond before heading for the exit, her teacup still steaming. Zyna questioned if she was on the right side of this. The Emperor had ordered her lover and daughter to their deaths with little purpose. However, her aid to this conspiracy was not about revenge against the Emperor. No, she told herself she was saving others from the same fate. If Emperor Octavian escaped Antonia's plans for a short rule, then the Telian Empire might be worse off. Zyna retrieved the buns from the oven and walked to her bedroom, savoring them for their aether and taste. After eating the scrumptious dinner, she pulled out a bloody undershirt with a hole above the heart. The dry blood cracked as she handled it, and Eric's familiar scent filled her nose. She hadn't decided which shirt to give Antonia, the one with Eric's blood or the one with pig's blood, until she had been asked for it. The shirt with Eric's blood in her hand suddenly combusted into ash, showering to the floor. She hoped she had made the correct decision. I felt naked, leaving the mage tower without wearing my armor. The gaudy ceremonial armor Zyna had made for me was left behind in my small room. However, I still had the resin hide and fancier semi-dress armor that Duchess Veronica had made for me in my dimensional space. I adjusted my belt so the black blade rested better. The man with Cornelius walked behind us. We walked through the city in the dark, legionnaire patrols seeming to ignore our breaking of the curfew. I was surprised as our path took us to the Eastern Legion Hall. Cornelius turned to his companion. Jansen, you can have the honors. In my old age, I seem to be getting rusty in surprising these pups in their sleep. He looked pointedly at me. The hound trainer nodded and smirked devilishly as he moved silently into the Legion Hall. After he disappeared inside, Cornelius spoke to me quietly. When the training starts, do not make friends with the others. You must be a lone wolf, so we can assign you where we want you. Don't you make the final decisions? I asked, puzzled. I had already been the odd man out during my Legion training, and it had not been fun. No. I won't be there during your training. My duties require me elsewhere, he said, as if I was an idiot. The trainers will decide who ends up in each of the 3 packs, and who ends up as the lone wolves. We need you to serve as a sentry in the Western Empire under the command of Centurion Sergius. He commands the Hounds in the western part of the Empire, where the secondary archives are located. He is fiercely loyal to the Emperor, so you must stand out in your time serving him. A short commotion inside the Legion Hall had Cornelius listening for a moment. A soft thud-thud echoed, and he relaxed. How do you know I will be assigned to the archives eventually? I asked skeptically. How they would put a foreigner in such a position made no sense. Don't worry about that, he said dismissively. Things are in play to make sure it happens. You need to earn Sergius' trust and find out where the archives are located. That caused me to go silent. Cornelius didn't even know where the secondary archives were located. I had so many questions, like how this was supposed to make a difference if it was going to take me years to be in a position to learn the location of the archives. I was left contemplating while Cornelius moved closer to the sentries at the building. 2 men came out in their nightclothes, and Cornelius congratulated them on being selected. Eventually, 4 more men joined us from the Legion Hall, and then we went to the Western Legion Hall, also called the Perfectus Legion. This was a slight against conscripts like myself, as the Perfectus Legion Hall was where the Legion volunteers were trained. 3 more men joined our group. These men had on common guard, and maybe they were given time to dress or their recruitment was expected, so they were more prepared. We exited the city, and it appeared the legionnaires at the gate were aware of our group's purpose. Outside the western gates, our numbers swelled to 21 recruits and 4 hound trainers. We moved a distance before Cornelius stopped our procession. "Welcome to the Hounds, pups. We will not be traveling to Knoll Gardens as it has been compromised by the enemy. Instead, we will be traveling to Fort Vesta on the Hyrian River." A short man looked around. "That is over 40 miles. Are we riding or getting into carts?" I could understand his confusion, as half of us were wearing sandals, and 4 of us were barefoot. Cornelius smiled ruefully. "Hounds are the most fit men in the Empire. We can cover 40 miles in half a day, fully equipped. Since you are just starting your training, all you need to carry this time is a canteen." The trainers dropped their packs and started handing out the canteens. I took mine and sniffed it. Lemon water. I took a little taste, and it had sugar or honey in it. Some other men took a long pull, and Cornelius shook his head disappointed but didn't say anything. "I don't have my boots," a youth with black hair noted. One of the trainers turned on him, saying, "You should have been prepared to move out at a moment's notice, pup. Now you will have to run barefoot." The intensity of the rebuke silenced everyone from further questions. Cornelius was smiling. "If you get to the fort before noon, you can have tomorrow off. Now, pups, run!" Our group started running down the paved road at a slow pace. I moved closer to one of the trainers. "How do I find this fort if I get ahead of everyone?" He laughed loudly at me. "You think you can outrun me? Cato, does this pup think he can outrun me? You will be foaming at the mouth when I am finished with you. If you don't keep up, I will have you run the beach twice daily until you can." The hound trainer immediately began to increase his pace, thinking he could tire me out. I wasn't sure how my 70 attribute in endurance compared to his, but this was an opportunity to separate myself from the group. I fell in next to him as we outpaced the group in the dark. It probably was not too smart to travel the roads in the pre-dawn like this. Even though the weather was cold, there were still creatures about. After an hour, the road turned to dirt and gravel, and those men who were barefoot were not going to have an easy time of it. It was clear I was going to be able to outpace the hound. "Where did you say Fort Vesta was again?" I said evenly. Breathing a little heavily, he replied, "There is a marker stone for the turnoff in some 40 miles. It is the small castle overlooking the ocean." "Thanks," I said, increasing my pace. The hound trainer tried to keep up, but I soon left him behind. To be fair to him, he had a decent-sized pack on, and his hound leathers and weapons added even more weight. All I had was my small pack, my black blade, and my skinning knife. I was soon running alone as the sun rose. Being alone and moving so fast, I was constantly alert to threats as I passed farm after farm. It looked like these farms had been battered by the summoner's unnatural weather. Skinny livestock and flattened, rotting fields were a common sight. The hound trainer hadn't lied to me. A large stone with the words Fort Vesta was clearly at a fork in the road some hours later. I turned off here and began a slow incline to find a black stone castle at the top of a bluff overlooking the ocean a few miles later. The salty air and crashing waves were invigorating. There were stairs down to the sandy beach a few hundred feet below, and I assumed this was the running beach the trainer had mentioned. I approached the small castle to find the doors locked. A man peered down from the portcullis. "What ya be doing here?" I immediately got worried the trainer had tricked me. "I am one of the new pups for hound training. Where's the rest of ya?" he barked back. I pointed behind me. "They should be along shortly. Can I come in and get some water?" I held up my empty canteen. The man paused to talk with someone behind him before turning back to me. "No, you can wait for Centurion Cornelius if you are truly one of the new litter of pups." He then disappeared over the wall, ending the conversation. I shook my head, filled my canteen from my dimensional space, and waited on a rock sipping cold blood orange juice. The group arrived an hour after midday, looking terrible. The trainer I had outpaced was with them. I nodded a little smugly to him. As the group collapsed, one of the pups with bloody feet cursed, "Pluto's ghost." That had to be 50 miles. I never thought I would make it. 47? Give or take a mile, Cornelius smirked. Looks like we didn't make it before midday, so no day off tomorrow. The group of men whimpered a bit, and I think some cried but hid their faces. I interrupted. I made it before midday. Cornelius turned on me, mirthful glee in his eyes. Oh, did you now? And if you were part of a pack, would you leave your comrades behind? I didn't answer. I just gave him a hard stare. Thought so. So, since you have so much energy, you are tasked with collecting cockles, mussels, and oysters after every morning run. Cornelius turned to the group of exhausted men. We have one healing mage at Fort Vesta, so try not to get too injured during your training. Cornelius paced in front of us. Half of you came from the Legion and the other half came from the army. Now that you are all pups, you are all equals. If I hear of any harassment due to someone coming from lower birth or because they were only a soldier and didn't qualify to be a legionnaire, then I give your trainers permission to walk you off that bluff. Am I clear? Grunts of acknowledgement from the slowly recovering men echoed over the distant waves. Cornelius nodded. You are going to receive the best training in the Empire, and you have the most important duty. You are the first line of defense against our enemies, both outside and inside our borders. You fail in your duty, and all the people you hold dear will be in jeopardy. He let that sink in. Cornelius seemed to have exhausted his speaking voice and nodded to a trainer to continue for him. The fort behind us is manned by the army. They were gracious enough to let us stay here, and we don't want to put them out, so we will be using the holding cells in the dungeon. Don't worry, for Hounds, these accommodations will feel luxurious. If you don't like them, then you are free to sleep on the beach below, another trainer sought to add. Be careful sleeping down there. Giant crabs, mermen, and even the occasional water elemental come ashore at night. He wore a smile as he stepped back. Cornelius took back the welcome speech. Now, I will introduce you to your 5 trainers for the next few months. They will teach you all 6 aspects of being a hound. Fighting, tracking, prowling, woodcraft, monster lore, and magic. Yes, magic. A viable spell form is required to become a hound because of the tools you will use in your duties. The men perked up, finally seeming eager after looking like they regretted their decision to join the Hounds. Don't get excited, pups. Not all of you will be given artifacts. They are too expensive to artifice for every hound to have them. There are 4 devices the Imperial artificers supply the Hounds. He sighed theatrically. You look more interested in the artifacts than being introduced to your trainers. Cornelius produced something that looked like a polished silver pocket watch and flipped it open. The blood compass. Place a sample of blood inside. He snapped it shut. And you can track a target anywhere on Dzia. The compass disappeared into his clothes. He produced a small leather-bound notebook. Ascending notebook. These notebooks are paired. Whatever is written on one will show on the other. The notebook disappeared inside his armor. If you can learn to channel your aether through your feet. He rested his foot on a rock. Silent boots. Murmurs among the men at the possibility of being given artifacts excited them. I had plenty of artifacts, some of which I still needed to learn what they did. The belt coiled in my backpack for one. Cornelius pulled out thick goggles that reminded me of aviator goggles, night sight spectacles. They will allow you to see almost perfectly in the dark. They are fragile and expensive, and only issued to the most competent hounds. He put away the last artifact, all eyes following it. Now back to introducing your trainers. With the state of our borders, our numbers are stretched, so we only have 5 trainers for you instead of the 10 we normally have. But I have assembled the best for your training. I have brought back retired hounds and a few who have left us to serve elsewhere in the Empire. But once a hound, always a hound. Everyone was now standing, no matter how much pain they were in. They wanted to appear tough because of the men who would be teaching us, even though a number looked old enough to be our grandfathers. He indicated the first man who had been with Cornelius when he came for me, Hound Jansen. One of the best stalkers in the Empire, whether it be rural or the wild. He pointed at the man I had outpaced running this morning. Hound Trainer David. He will ensure all of you are fit enough to do your duties for days without rest if required. Hound Cato is our woodcraft specialist. He will ensure you can find enough food in the middle of a blizzard while not losing your manhood to frostbite. Cornelius turned and pointed. Our master tracker is Hound Hearn. He will also teach you everything he knows about beasts and monstrosities. You should hang on to every word that comes out of his mouth, as what you learn from him could save your life and your pack's one day. Cornelius stressed with all seriousness. Your last trainer is our master martial specialist. He will make sure you are efficient with your bow and blades. The door to the castle cracked, and an older man walked, and all eyes turned to him. My jaw became unhinged. Standing with the 4 hound trainers was Constantine. Hound Constantine will join us while his company is quartered guarding a displacement mage in the safety of a city. While the other men nodded appreciatively at the skilled men about to teach them, I knew better. I could see it in Constantine's eyes as his eyes traveled over everyone before settling on me in a smirk forming. The only thing that could escape my lips was a single word: fuck. I didn't have a chance to talk to Constantine before we were shuffled inside the fort. The fort, or castle as they called it, was small and sparse. It was just a large tower surrounded by high walls. A dozen soldiers and support staff looked at us as we entered the bailey. Constantine moved off to the right and was talking to the soldier who hadn't let me in when I arrived early. Of course he played a role in that. We followed Cato into the stone structure that could have been better maintained. The salt air had eroded the mortar between the stones. One of the pups beside me exclaimed, "Neptune's beard, how old is this place?" It was here before the First Legion. A blonde-haired pup answered in a haughty, know-it-all tone. So, at least 2,000 years. It's just a watchtower for overseeing the ocean passage. Maybe before the First Legion, it might have served as a summer home for nobles. But now it just watches the waves. We entered to find an open floor plan that served as the kitchen and dining area. A few soldiers playing cards and dice looked up dispassionately as we entered. Cato took us down the steps, the powerful scent of mildew in the air. We passed the lower storerooms and descended deeper inside the small castle. The dungeons were as advertised, dark, with rotting doors and rusting iron bars on the cells. It was obvious they had not been used in a long, long time. I turned into the first cell that only had one bed. A new straw mattress and blankets had been placed on the stone shelf. I even had a small window overlooking the waves below. "Cozy," I muttered. The walls had a thin layer of salt, probably from violent storms getting salt water through the tiny window over the centuries. I touched the 3 bars on the tiny window, and they crumbled with little effort. Hound Hearn was behind me. "Don't worry. Most nights will be spent in the wild. If you need healing, head up to the kitchens. Dinner will be served soon. It's the only hot meal given every day, so I suggest you don't miss it." He ducked out to tell the men in the next cell. I worked the bars out of the window and widened it slightly by removing the stone with my space. The outer wall was over a foot thick, but I could stretch my neck out to look down. It was over 200 feet to the sandy beach that was quickly being swallowed by the incoming tide. It looked like some soldiers were down there among the rocks, probably harvesting crabs, clams, and oysters. I looked at my cell's door. I had some bacon grease for the hinges. Not that they did much to hold a warped and rotting door. At least the salt-crusted walls prevented mold from growing. The mattress was scratchy, with fresh straw poking out of it. Sighing, I headed up to the common room. I sat at a table alone with my bowl of thick seafood soup. Constantine sat across from me. Supplies are tight, so the soldiers here are getting what they can from the sea. He spooned a large serving into his mouth, a tentacle dangling on his lips before he slurped it in. It is actually quite good. "How is the company, and why are you here?" I found the tentacles in my own soup and pushed them to the side in favor of the crab meat at least. That was my guess by texture and taste. It was not bad overall. We finished our tablet testing rotation with the magistrate, and Castile was assigned to the city of Brapo to reinforce the displacement mages legionnaires there. He shrugged. "One of the safest cities in the Empire, and as boring as Pluto's realm. Cornelius sent me a message asking if I would be interested in training this litter of pups, and here I am." He smiled while stuffing a slimy tentacle into his mouth, and chewing louder than he needed to. Another trainer, Jansen, sat with us. Cornelius is riding back to the capital now. He said you were in charge. Grant is not going to make it. He is needed in the south, Constantine grunted. Didn't have the balls to tell me himself. I said I would help with the martial training, and that was all. Now I have to track all the pups and ensure they are competent enough not to get themselves killed on their first assignment. He pushed away the seafood stew. It was mostly gone anyway. Fine. When are the truth seekers due? They could only spare one in a week. He will be escorted from Telha. Stay the night and return the next morning, Jansen said, starting in on the stew. Constantine stood abruptly. Don't touch your bowls. Dinner is done. You need to learn to eat your meals quickly and on the move. See the healer if you need it. And get to sleep. The beach run starts at sunrise. Pups! Everyone started scuffling and bitching about not being given time to eat. Constantine waved over the other 4 trainers, acting irritated, but I knew him too well, and he would savor being in charge of this masochistic training regime. I was the first one down the stairs and worked my door closed. Then, using my dimensional space, I made some stone wedges to push under the door. I pulled out a blanket from my storage and laid it on the bed so the straw wouldn't stab into me. I entered the dreamscape briefly to manifest 10 tomes of knowledge. I was going to have more trouble remembering which books I hadn't added soon. The amulet returned to my storage, and I pulled out a meat bun and chewed on it while listening to the waves crash below. The sand must be completely covered with the incoming tide by now. The waves on the rocks drowned out the other men talking in the other cells. Cornelius told me to act the loner, and I was doing my best. I was already getting annoyed glances from the other pups. As the light from the window faded, I pulled out 2 essences, my only power essence remaining, and a displacement essence. A foggy sphere with a blinking light bouncing around inside entered my mouth first. I felt it expand that aspect of my core, and once it settled, the apex power essence was next. My muscles burned as that essence worked. Power was a combined aspect of strength and quickness, allowing you to move heavier objects faster. That brought my thoughts to the great sword and armor of the Elven White. Both artifacts were buried under the tavern in Caelora. Maybe one day I will be able to reclaim them. I took a short nap, as short as required by the ring of sustenance, and then went through a stretching routine in the dark. My time with the Hounds was going to be challenging, as I would be isolating myself from the group and unable to use the amulet for long periods. After stretching, I meditated using the exercises Castile had taught me, but my focus was on the spell form for Purify Self. I paused a few times to slip into the dreamscape and refresh my memory. It was much more difficult doing it this way than simply spending hours memorizing the spell forms in the dreamscape. A scraping sound by the door broke my concentration. It looked like the first of my litter was headed up the stairs for the morning run. I pulled on my boots and followed. It was the blonde-haired pup who knew about the fortress age. He looked back as he climbed the stairs and smiled. Name is Castian, 5th son of Baron Romus Helvia. Eric Marco, I replied, acting half-heartedly and expressing disinterest in conversation. You know our instructors? He asked, trying to make conversation as we ascended together. He must have noticed Constantine had sat with me. Just Constantine. We served in a mage company together. We reached the bailey and headed toward the gate. 2 exhausted soldiers from Night Watch cracked a gate for us to exit. We soon stood at the top of the bluff. The stairs down to the beach were narrow and worn but didn't look dangerous. Others of our litter joined us slowly. David and Constantine stood behind us, and I recognized the grin on Constantine's face. Constantine barked. He said, "We begin our beach run at sunrise. I can see the sun cracking the horizon, and you are not even on the beach." The group scrambled down the stairs to the beach 200 feet below. When we reached the bottom, Constantine barked again. "Not fast enough. Try again, and this time I want you at the front." He pointed to the slowest pup on the descent. The young man was from the regular army and had not been through legionnaire training. We all climbed and descended twice more before Constantine was satisfied with our speed. At least we were not in armor or wearing packs. Several of us had struggled with the stairs, and I could tell they were going to have lots of difficulty in the future as they were bent over, sucking wind. The tide had retreated and left seaweed strewn across the long beach. Constantine had a smirk, which was not a good sign. "This morning, I painted 20 rocks with numbers, 1 to 20. I thought they were very nice rocks and would like them placed at the bottom of the stairs here. We were all looking around for the rocks. He started to assign each of us a number as realization formed. When he finished assigning numbers, he said, "Bring me your rock. They are that way. You have gone too far if you reach the two triangular rocks side by side in the middle of the beach." We all took off at a steady run in the sand. I moved to the breaker because the sand was too difficult to run in boots. Off the shore were dozens of protruding rocks as we ran. Landing a ship here would be difficult. I started to outdistance the others as I looked for marked rocks in the sand. After 2 miles, I slowed as I noticed a field of rocks under the bluff, hundreds of rocks of all sizes. I got off the breaker and moved into the rock field, searching. Soon, others were with me. No one could find any marked rocks as we moved. Another man in the company pointed at a sandy patch with exactly 20 rocks, and we moved together, but no one found any numbers. The others were swearing at the pointlessness of the task. I bent over and turned over a suspicious rock. The number 11 was clearly marked on the bottom. Then, I noticed the difficult-to-see tracks in the sand. We should have been looking for tracks and not rocks to find them. "Number 11 here," I yelled, leaving it turned over. I moved to look for number 18, my rock. When I found my rock, I cursed Constantine as it was clearly larger than the others, easily 90 pounds. Others were already carrying their load back to the waiting hounds. Even with the heavier load that I shifted from shoulder to shoulder, I finished 5th among us, but it was challenging and I had to heal myself slightly. I dropped my rock where Constantine had wanted them. Other rocks thudded, and many men winced as they tested their backs from the awkward load. I noticed the healing mage had joined the 2 instructors. When everyone reached us, Constantine gave the last man a breather by inspecting each rock. He pointed at 2 men. "You 2 brought me the wrong rock. You had 15, and you have 5. They all got here." One of the men rasped angrily. Constantine shook his head. "And if you are given orders to arrest the 5th son of a farmer, and you bring back the 15th, have you done your duty? What if the 15th son is innocent? How many farmers have 15 sons?" Another man questioned Constantine. "That was the wrong thing to do, as we all had to carry our stones back to where we found them and bring back the correct stone this time." It was an effective lesson to pay attention to the details. As men fell into the sand, the healer went to each of us and checked us out. I had healed all my minor sores and injuries already. Constantine stood over us as we rested. "Now the hounds of the Empire are fabled for their cunning and fitness. What I am about to share with you is unknown to many." He produced a minor dark blue Spherian essence. This, a lesser essence of endurance. Everyone sat up, and it was clear this group knew what essences were, even if some had never consumed them. When you consume this, it will fortify your endurance attribute. This means you could spend months never exercising and remain relatively fit. Consuming it will also help you raise your endurance attribute more quickly. With these lesser essences, your potential will never change, but you will see the benefit as we train. "Who gets it?" Castian asked, getting to his feet. "I think the pompous son of a baron thought he would be entitled to it since he asked." Constantine smiled. "All of you?" He held up a bag and jingled it. "Every day, as long as you complete the training, you will get another physical essence until you have consumed one for each attribute. This is one of the benefits of being a hound." I admitted it was a strong motivator to work hard and stick it out. Most of these men would never see an essence in their lifetime otherwise. When I got my essence, I pretended to consume it and sent it to my storage since I had consumed a physical essence recently. A much happier group climbed the steps back to the fort. "Where are you going, pup?" Constantine barked at us. We all turned confused as we had just been dismissed. David had a wicker basket and a 3-pronged spear in his hand and approached me. Cornelius said, "You get to harvest from the shoals for everyone." I looked incredulous, not thinking he had been serious. "The rest of you can go. Hearn will be starting his morning lecture in an hour. Eat your fill." Constantine waved the group up the stairs. As the group moved slowly up the stairs, Constantine and David approached me. "We will show you where and what to collect. Take off your boots as we will be wading in the tide pools. When the basket is full, you can bring it up." This additional task was better than I thought. As Constantine and David helped me fill the basket, I learned to identify the various shellfish, locate hidden octopus, and fish in the tide pools. Fishing trident. A large sea turtle taller than me came to sun itself in the sand, and the 2 hounds paused and argued about whether they should attempt to kill it. In the end, they decided the harvest in the tide pools was enough. I had sand in every crevice, and the smell of fishy water clung to my clothes as I carried the 70-pound haul up the steps. David snorted. We were lucky nothing dangerous came out of the ocean this morning. 2 soldiers disappeared last week on the beach. Constantine grunted and encouraged me to hurry. Move a little faster, pup. You don't want to miss any of the lectures. You might miss something that could save your life one day. Of course, I was the one who had been hauling a rock up and down the beach this morning, and now carried the catch up the steps. I did get some sympathetic looks from the others who waited on benches for me. David took the basket into the castle to be processed. We had a 2-hour lecture from Hound on goblins, the 3 primary species of goblin, each one's preferred habitats, fighting styles, and how best to track them. When he was finished, we were allowed to ask questions. He finished the lecture by informing us that we would be learning about slimes and oozes tomorrow. Our lunch was water and as many common ration bars as we cared to eat. It was beyond filling and calorie intense, but the men still complained. I thought that Maveth might volunteer to be a hound just for the unlimited ration bars. After lunch was weapons training. We didn't fight each other. We just got familiar with the weapons of the Hounds. Hounds carried 2 silver wire garroteza silver-coated short sword silver-coated throwing daggers and a hand axe. We would eventually be given a composite legion short bow and silvered arrows. But for now, it was about the martial weapons against dummies. All the Hound trainers participated in correcting our weapons training against dummies. The focus was on achieving a killing or disabling blow as quickly as possible. A lot of the instruction was focused on attacking from behind with surprise. Getting yourself in such an advantageous position would be part of the other training. The evening was spent in the woods with Cato, Jansen, Hearn, and David. Moving silently, identifying plants, recognizing animal tracks, and following them. I found this the most relaxing part of the day, as one trainer would shadow 5 of us as we worked on tracking a particular animal. The evening dinner was the worst part of the day as Constantine would stand up in the common room and ask each pup 3 questions while we ate our only hot meal of the day. If you answered all 3 questions correctly, you got a bar of candied fruit and nuts as a reward. If you got even 1 question wrong, you got nothing. After each question, right or wrong, a hound would explain the answer in more depth to ensure everyone understood. Perhaps I was the only one who noticed the food reward system was a way dogs were trained, but I didn't reveal my thoughts to the others. Of course, my questions were the most difficult and obscure, and everyone knew it. They all had questions from lessons early in the day. All of Constantine's questions for me focused on things he had taught me months ago, which I did not think was fair. The first night, I managed to get 2 questions correct. This was how each day progressed for the next week. 7 days of training for 7 essences. My performance in just about every task outperformed everyone else. This alone got me some resentment from the others. As they formed their cliques, I remained aloof. On the 7th night, a cold rain had been persistent throughout the day. We were all soaked and shivering from being outside all day while we ate venison stew, courtesy of Constantine. We were waiting for the evening questioning to begin, while Jansen worked on getting a large fire going to warm the room. The door to the common room opened, and 6 legionnaires entered. A young man in white and gold robes entered after them, the robes of a truth seeker, and I happened to recognize this boy. He was the one who had questioned me before Castile's tribunal. The young truth seeker looked to have aged since he questioned me about the fall of Masha and the battle with the storm giant. Not only had his face hardened over time, but his eyes also looked less innocent and less eager to perform his task. Several men in the room recognized the robes for what they were. One of the pups, a young soldier with dark hair and eyes, dashed for the door. Constantine was prepared and tripped him, while 2 hounds pinned him to the ground. Constantine addressed the truth seeker with annoyance. If you had come a week ago, we could have saved some essences. I studied the other pups in the room. About half of them had doubt in their eyes about what was to come next. Most eyes were on their comrade being bound on the floor. I rubbed my forearm. The spell forms inscribed on my bones should allow me to fool the truth seeker. You first, Constantine indicated to me. Truth seeker, you can use the storeroom below. The truth seeker nodded, and 4 of his legionnaires led him down the steps while the other 2 positioned themselves at the entrance to the stairs. I walked past the 2 legionnaires who smelled like wet horses and their armor dripped water steadily onto the stone floor. A small storeroom had the door open with 2 chairs separated by a dilapidated desk. The legionnaire squeezed inside, and the truth-seeker took a seat, removing his outer robes that had been soaked in the rain. Sighing, he took the seat furthest from the door. As I sat across from him, his eyes lit up. Recognition forming. "Legionnaire Eric Marco, is that you?" I offered a friendly smile, digging for his name in my memory. "Truth-seeker Janus. It is me. But now I am Hound Eric. Ah, yes. I must thank you for the vital information you relayed to me in our last session. It greatly improved my standing with the Scholarium and with the Emperor himself. I am already a Tier 3 truth-seeker." He smiled happily. The door was closed and the room quickly filled with the stench of poorly washed bodies and horses. "Have you thought of anything new regarding the discovery?" My forearms itched as I felt the question itself wash over me. With little preamble, he was already using his magic on me. "No. I told you everything I remembered," I replied succinctly. He didn't mask his disappointed look. "Ah, very well. We should get through this quickly. The Hound in charge will probably want me to question the man who also tried to run." He settled and focused on me with his first question. "Are you planning to do harm to the Empire or Emperor?" I could feel the spell form locking onto me, now that I knew what to look for. My arms itched so badly that I wanted to scratch but resisted the temptation. "No," I replied a heartbeat after he asked. "Have you harmed the Empire or Emperor in the past?" He asked his next question. "No," I replied, in a relaxed cadence. It was clear the bone-inscribed spell forms were doing their work. "Do you have magic on your person to deceive a truth-seeker?" he asked, turning the black ball in his hand. I had forgotten about this part. My arms no longer itched. They burned. Still, I didn't hesitate to answer. "No." I studied his eyes, looking for any change. "Excellent." He put away the ball inside his clothes, produced a notebook, and spent a few minutes taking notes before returning to question me. He tapped his quill, thinking of a question. I guessed he was pretending to appear as if the questions were casual. "Have you uncovered anything that may be useful to the Empire?" he asked slowly, as if the question had just come to him. My mind raced, and I almost misstepped and said no. "Yes. The Atlanteum ruins and the shimmering labyrinth." His eyes narrowed in confusion. "How do you know about the shimmering labyrinth?" I narrowed my eyes right back at him and turned the question on him accusingly. "How do you know about the shimmering labyrinth?" His legion guards tightened their grips on their hilts at my tone. "You must have been on the expedition to locate it," he surmised, ignoring my question. "You certainly get around. The 2 most interesting discussions happening in the Imperial Palace in the last year, and you were involved in both." I shrugged. "Fortuna seems to curse my luck. Nearly ended up dead both times with little to show for it." Truth-seeker Janus chuckled at my joke and continued. "I have been tasked with trying to locate items similar to the Kettle of Souls for the Emperor's next expedition to Caelora. Of course, that expedition is on hold, with the orcs and elves waving their swords at the borders. But if I require a Hound's assistance, I know who to call on who has Fortuna on his shoulder." He pulled out a scroll and looked down at it. "Impressive. You have 3 spell forms. Minor healing, a dimensional pocket space, and an air shield." I could read the document upside down, and that was all that was noted after my name. I could see the names of the others, but didn't strain my eyes. I could recreate it later in the dreamscape and study it then. "Yes, that is all I have," I replied. He jotted down some more notes before asking me broad questions about whether I knew any plots or dangers to the Empire. My spell form itched as he proceeded, but soon I was allowed to leave. Throughout the entire session, his legionnaires had been tense, and only now that I was leaving did they finally relax. Climbing the stairs to the common room, I spotted Constantine chatting with 2 other hounds in the corner. A fleeting look of relief crossed his face before he returned to the conversation. I couldn't tell if he was concerned I might say something foolish, or if he feared my bone runes wouldn't work. Another one of the pups brushed past me to get questioned. I took a seat alone at a table and sipped on some weak ale as we waited. The men cycled down the stairs, spending about 15 minutes each. The 9th man questioned was brought up bound and gagged with 2 legionnaires dragging him. I was close enough to hear them explain to Constantine that he had raped a count's daughter. I think the pup's name was Francis, and we picked him up at the Perfectus Legion Hall. I guessed he was not long for this world by the dead expression in his eyes. After all the men cycled through, they tried to bring down the man who had tried to escape after seeing the truth-seeker arrive. Only he was already dead when they attempted to drag him. Constantine rushed over with some of the hounds, and they inspected him. After a few minutes, Constantine stood and announced the verdict. He killed himself with his spell form, dried out his own lungs. I was in disbelief at committing suicide in such a manner without ever panicking visibly. Whispers that he must have been a spy and supposition on which empire had planted him murmured across the tables. Truth-seeker Yanis came up from below and talked with Constantine for a good hour while we waited. Yanis constantly referred to his notes as they talked. Finally, the truth-seeker and his legionnaires were led up the stairs for the night. Constantine stood and said, "You passed your first test. Tomorrow we will issue your hound thereafter the morning run." As we left the common room, the mood was heavy. Having lost 2 of the litter, I felt nothing as I had not tried to befriend anyone over the last week. After securing my room, I consumed a displacement and dexterity essence. I was seriously tempted to check my progress with the table but resisted. There would be time for that in a safer environment. I sent out a pulse of earth speak into the walls. I liked to check on the others before entering the dreamscape for a few minutes to train my ability. My range was about 35 feet now, and the larger sphere of feedback required practice to sort out what I was seeing. Most men were lying in their bunks, tossing and turning, trying to sleep every other night. They were so exhausted they passed out almost immediately. But the session with the truth-seeker seemed to have disturbed them. I spent about 15 minutes in the dreamscape, creating 10 books to add to my library, and studying the spell form for Purify Self. It was going painfully slow learning this spell form for the Void Affinity. I recreated the list of the pups and their spell forms. It was interesting to see what everyone could do. 4 men even had 2 spell forms, but I was the only one with 3. I exited the dreamscape and checked my surroundings with earth speak again. There were mice above in the grain bags. I traced their path through the cracked foundation before sleeping for a few hours. I meditated on the spell form in the early hours, waiting for the day to begin. I was the first one up in the morning and found the truth-seeker and his guards readying their horses. They had the dead man draped over a spare mount, and I guessed he was going to be sent to a necromancer for questioning. The other man was bound and seated on his own mount. I guessed he would be turned over to the Duke for justice. His trial was over and his guilt was confirmed. Constantine was talking to Yanis, who was mounted. Constantine waved me over. For some reason, the young truth-seeker was impressed with you. I have that effect on people, I noted in good humor. And Constantine shook his head in annoyance. He made a request for you to be assigned to him when you finished your training, Constantine said flatly. I didn't know what to say to that. Was Yanis part of the conspiracy? I told him the Empire's hounds are stretched too thin, Constantine added coldly. Still, I will write a formal request. His skills and luck are wasted in the hounds, Yanis said haughtily from atop his horse. He turned his mount and started off out the open gates, mud being kicked up by his mount as he left. When all the riders left and the gates were closed, Constantine told me quietly, "Be wary of that one. His ambition knows no bounds. You no longer need to collect shellfish after the morning beach run." He patted me on the shoulder once. None of the other hounds were present, so the outpouring of affection went unnoticed. On the beach we were running down and back 4 times this morning for a total of 8 miles. Most of us now took our boots off for the run as the shifting sand wrecked our feet if we wore our boots. Since we were not carrying our rocks, I was the first to finish. When the last of the group finished, Constantine decided our rocks would look better outside the gates, so we carried our burdens up the stairs. I went first so that I didn't get behind one of the slower men. Dropping my rock outside the gate, I sat on Bob. Naming my rock Bob might have been a sign I was under some mental duress. Not talking with the others certainly contributed to it, and Bob was a good listener. I heard one of the rocks bouncing off the rocks as it returned to the beach, and was glad I went first. I pulled a canteen to my hand and drank while other rocks thudded around me, and the men collapsed. Nautis was the man who dropped his stone, and we waited for him to retrieve it. Constantine and David followed him up. Well, today is your lucky day. No lecture this morning on hippogriffs and griffins. Instead, we are handing out your hound gear. Follow me. The others rolled to their feet, a child's eagerness to get their hands on the gear we would use as a hound. I was certain we would not be getting any artifacts today, just the standard hound gear. Large wooden tables were set up in the bailey, and covered in weapons, clothing, and packs. The group rushed forward, and Constantine barked, "Stop! Cato and Hearn will hand each of you your gear, and then we will explain each piece." The gear all appeared to be identical, and we were handed a pack first. The pack was much smaller than a legion pack, and was stuffed with small individual kits for making snares, a fishing kit, a thin bedroll, and a spool of black silky rope. Hearn explained everything inside. "You have a fishing kit, 200 feet of wire, snips for that wire, 50 feet of braided twine that can support the weight of a man, and a bedroll made from ice bear hide. It may look thin, but it reflects your body heat, and you could survive in a blizzard with it. The fire flint and shavings are up to you if you want to carry them. 2 of you have spell forms to start fires, so you should discard the kits to save weight. There were also 8 ration bars inside the packs." Not that anyone was excited about them. Our belts were handed out next with our utility hand axe, short sword, and 4 small pouches. One of the pouches had our 2 wired gear rods. Another pouch had the familiar myconid powder for masking your scent. "Dandani, direste anikardia der bani ana dir." "Aldrin said the familiar myconid powder for masking your scent." Constantine explained the utility belt. "The short sword is coated in silver. As you are learning from Hearn, some things out there can only be injured with runic weapons or silver. Note the blade dulls more easily than steel, so remember your training and target exposed flesh. To that point, both of your garrotes are coated in silver dust. Your hand axe is not silver-coated but forged by the Empire's best weaponsmiths with the finest steel." As we all tried on the belts and adjusted them, Cato explained the utility pouches. "One of the pouches holds your garrotes. Make sure to put the garrotes in the pouch on the side of your dominant hand. The second pouch contains 2 vials of myconid powder. We've talked about these many times. Just a little can disrupt a man or creature's scent. The middle pouch holds 2 potions, one for minor healing and one for stamina." As everyone searched for the potions, he laughed. "You will receive the potions when you're on assignment, not before. If you had them now, you'd be tempted to drink them." Everyone frowned because that was definitely true for the majority of us. Constantine finished the explanation. "The last double-hardened pouch is for your blood compass, but not all of you will be given a blood compass." The throwing daggers were next, were fairly small, and both came with concealable sheaths for either the wrist or boot. I planned to put one in each boot. The final table had the composite short bows of the Legion and the quivers. Constantine warned us, "If you can't hit a target reliably at 50 paces, I will take these back." He looked pointedly at me, reminding me of my lack of skill on the walls of Masha. "The arrows are silvered, and you will notice the grooves in the head. The Hounds use 2 types of poison. Both are applied wet to the grooves and then dried. When the head contacts the blood, it activates." Castian asked haughtily, "What do the poisons do?" Constantine answered him harshly, "We are not giving them to you until you can prove you won't stick yourself. One poison prevents blood from clotting, which is excellent for bleeding out the large game. The other is a paralytic. It acts slowly and requires multiple shots on creatures larger than a horse." "When do we get our artifacts?" a short man from the army said in a whiny voice. "You haven't earned them yet," Constantin said, practically yelled at the man. "You should feel blessed. By Diana, I am letting you have your gear after just a week of training." That quieted everyone as they gathered their gear. I picked up a quiver with 13 arrows. I inspected the bow I was handed. It was brand new, and I tested the pull weight. It was slightly harder than I expected, but manageable. With all the dexterity essences I had consumed, I hoped my aim had improved. "Your hound clothing is last. It is made from desert centaur hide. It is highly resistant to being punctured and slashed. It is supple and easy to move quietly in. The hides are sewn together using dungeon spider silk. Spider silk is incredibly strong, but fire will destroy it in seconds." Cato advised as he started handing out the leggings and heavy jackets. It was weird wearing pants after so long and the tunic-style dress for so long. They also got my sizes slightly off as my jacket was tight on the shoulders. and the pants didn't cover my boots when I sat. The color of the leather was a flat black, but it looked like both pieces could be turned inside out to a flat gray. Neither the jacket nor the leggings had any pockets. I inhaled deeply and was surprised the uniform didn't have the expected leather smell to it. In fact, I couldn't smell anything. As everyone was admiring their new gear, Constantine drew his runic weapon. "Now that you are all dressed up, who wants to test themselves against me?" Castian, the haughty blonde noble, nearly jumped to his feet. "I will cross blades with you, Hound," he declared. His smug smile suggested he thought himself Constantine's superior. We had spent the last week drilling and not fighting. Most of us were eager to test our mettle against the Hound trainers, especially Constantine, who was at the center of our torment. Constantine just smirked as he nodded, accepting his challenger. We all circled around a makeshift fighting circle. Castian had good balance and footwork as the pair circled, showing years of experience. What he didn't realize was that Constantine had been studying him the last week, picking out his tendencies and weaknesses. Both men had a sword and a hound buckler. 2 exchanges later, Constantine trapped Castian's blade, elbowed him in the face, swept his leg, and stomped on his hand. Breaking fingers, Castian's nose was flowing with blood, and he groaned in disorientation, his sword hand disfigured. "We don't train you to attack unless you know you have the advantage," Constantine barked, then turned toward the castle and called for the healer. A tired healer came out a moment later, quickly assessing the situation and moving to Castian. Constantine looked at the 17 of us. "Now, are any of you prepared to challenge me?" I slowly drew my blade. I would have preferred the black blade, but this short sword was close in weight and length to the mage bane. Constantine looked amused. "No spell forms," he muttered loud enough for everyone to hear. Was that because he didn't want the others to see mine, or just to give himself a chance? I restrained from taunting him even though my confidence was high. I faced off against my mentor, and we tapped swords to our shields. Constantine came at me in an attack sequence I had never seen from him before. It was similar to one of the legionnaires from the Imperial Legion Hall. I retreated and parried the rapid sequence. Constantine paused and narrowed his eyes. "You have gotten faster." I couldn't resist. "More likely you have just gotten slower," I quipped, earning chuckles from the other hounds and a few brave pups. Constantine considered his options, dropped his buckler to the earth, and drew a long dagger from his belt. The killer instinct in his eyes told me he was going all out. I felt prepared but did not drop my buckler. I rarely trained dual-wielding in my dreamscape. There were 3 quick exchanges, and I remained on the defensive, expecting some trick. I managed to score 1 cut on Constantine's hand when I overpowered his parry with my superior strength and leverage. A slow stream of blood flowed down his blade and dripped onto the ground. He had to keep that angle to avoid the blood pooling on his grip. The spectators were quiet at the display. I don't think any of them would believe me if I told them a year ago I had never held a blade before. Constantine had an unreadable expression. "Are you going to defend all day, or will you attack at some point?" "Don't say something stupid," I told myself. "I didn't want to embarrass you," I stated with a smirk. "Damn it, I couldn't resist. Or maybe you think you can't win," Constantine said as he stepped into another exchange. This time I got the better of him by getting my shield inside his dagger arm and kicking his shin hard before dancing back. I didn't break the bone, but I definitively contused the muscles, evidenced by his limpness he was faking. I circled, testing his movement, and he turned with me. I smiled and went on the offensive for the first time. I had given Constantine enough face by letting the match go for almost 10 minutes. I moved in and pushed him back. He stepped in and threw his dagger at my face. I could have made it vanish into my space, but I just ducked the flying blade. Before he could draw a replacement, I used my shield to block his blade and swung at his exposed ribs. He had no chance to evade. The tip of my sword was yanked down, and Constantine worked a dagger out of his sleeve in one quick motion, catching it in his hand. He stabbed me in the navel and danced away smiling. "Fuck. You said no spell forms," I grunted. I looked down incredulously at the dagger impaled in my gut, shock not giving way to pain just yet. He had used his weak telekinesis spell form to yank my sword. I could tell he expended all his aether in the attempt by his heavy eyes. Without remorse, he said, "Do you think your enemy is going to play fair?" I reached for the dagger, planning to pull it out. Heal. and continue the fight. Constantine had other ideas. Heal a lithe, take care of the pup's wound. I think that is enough of a demonstration today. Let's pair off and get some practice in against each other. As everyone moved to find a dance partner, Constantine gave me a slight nod of respect. I had underestimated the man again. He had never shown a concealed forearm dagger before, and obviously had a wider array of combat styles to draw. Next time, I would show him my full progress. I had been holding back my speed and skill as well. The healer did a terrible job healing me, as he was trying to conserve either for the injuries to come. I corrected his poor work before partnering with a tall, skinny pup with acne. He lacked speed, strength, and experience, so I did my best to point out his mistakes, but found I lacked the patience to teach him. This was odd because when I taught Livia, Flora, and Rena, I remembered being eager to teach and remaining patient when they made mistakes. A few of the pups tried to talk to me, but I was still holding on to my loner card. Now that I had proven to be the best fighter among the pups, I was someone worth getting on the good side of. If you were matched against me in martial combat practice, I could make your life miserable. Lunch was just ration bars. I pretended to consume mine, but didn't feel any hunger. After a modest rest, we were instructed to bring our bows and arrows outside. We traveled down the hill and into the familiar woods. In a large clearing, dummies had been set up at 2 distances. I estimated them at 25 and 50 paces. Constantine stood in front of us, smiling. All hounds are excellent marksmen. If you cannot hit the furthest target 13 out of 13 times, I will make sure you end up running messages from city to city and never be named a true hound. Constantine stood sideways to the targets and proceeded to fire 13 arrows at the distant target in a quick tempo. All 13 arrows hit the torso. Now, before you fire a single arrow, you need to inspect each of your arrows for splits, loose fletching, and arrowhead sharpness. The last thing you want is to face down an ogre. Aim for his eye and have your arrow shatter on your release. The hounds walked among us, and every quiver had 2 bad arrows in them. Mine had a loose fletching, and though difficult to find, one was cracked. The instructor supervised spot repairs for the 2 broken arrows. We had a small vial of alchemist glue in our packs that reminded me of superglue when I got it on my hand. As we worked, Constantine supervised and explained, "Those of you who have not shot a bow before, we will teach you. Building calluses on your fingers and getting used to wearing an archer's vambrace will take time." One of the older pups asked, "Why do we only get 13 arrows?" David, who was closest to him, answered, "Normal army quivers hold 17 or 34 arrows. We have found 13 is the best number for the smallest quiver. A hound rarely misses his target and can easily retrieve his arrows after a successful fight, so 13 is deemed enough." Constantine laughed at the explanation. The truth is the Emperor was trying to save on the cost of the silvered arrowheads. Most hounds will exchange the light quiver for the larger 17 the first chance they get. I suggest you do the same. You will not be charged to replenish your silvered arrows, but there are only 3 cities in the Empire where you can. If you are found to be selling the silver arrowheads, you will be hung. He finished with a deadpan delivered warning. After the arrow tutorial, we went through caring for the bow and arrows. There was an oiled wrap for the bow in our pack, and a sock for the quiver to keep the arrows dry and from rattling while we moved. We were all given 2 rounds at the closer target, while the hounds helped us adjust technique. This was not my first time using a bow, and after 3 arrows, I had a good feel for this bow. Janssen took particular interest in me and helped me refine my aim and smooth my release. I didn't miss the closest target once, and my grouping got tighter and tighter. I was certain my higher dexterity was playing a significant role. I had much better control over fine adjustments, and my hands were much steadier than when I learned to shoot on the wall in Maka. Constantine kept eyeing me as I released shot after shot. "For your 3rd round, switch to the furthest target," he bellowed as a number of men were rubbing their fingertips. I had my black spider silk gloves, and they appeared to be holding up well. When we switched to the further target, I was low with my first shot, hitting the bottom of the dummy. The remaining 12 shots were all tightly grouped on the chest, within 12 inches of each other. "Think we have a master marksman here?" Jansen touted my skill. There were others in our group who all hit the furthest target with each arrow, just not with the same grouping as me. "Means nothing if he can't hit a moving target during a fight," Constantine said. Somehow, He seemed irritated at my display. Move a target to 70 paces. If your master marksman can hit with all 13 arrows, the pups can have the rest of the morning off to lick their wounds. Everyone stopped as I retrieved and inspected my arrows. The other pups offered to exchange arrows if one of mine was damaged or I didn't like the feel of it. I didn't take them up on their offer. Constantine took the first shot at the distant target and scored a hit on the center line. I inhaled as I was guessing how high over the target I would need to aim. Jansen helped, about 2 body lengths based on your draw weight. There is a light breeze coming from the left, but it's too light to affect the arrow's flight with the trees. I could see the leaves atop the trees waving very slightly. I drew an imaginary line along the horizon, and another line vertically. I drew back and raised my bow arm, and when I met the horizontal line, let the arrow fly. Everyone held their breath as the arrow's flight took it to the target with a satisfying thud. Cheers broke out, but Constantine silenced the men. He still needs to hit with his next 12 shots. He looked at me. You will not have a minute in combat to assess your arrow's path like that. All your remaining arrows need to be released in less than a minute, or your effort will not count. That pronouncement got grumbles from the pups. Even the hound instructors looked a little peeved by the changes to the ad hoc contest. I just shrugged as I didn't care if we got the morning off or not. Even though the training was intense, I could heal myself and the fatigue seemed to wash away easier for me with the ring. I took my position and released the next arrow, and Constantine started counting loudly with the twang of the bow. 1, 2, 3, 4. I ignored the intentional distraction. I retrieved an arrow, notched, aimed, and released, one after the other until all 12 arrows were expended. 51. It was as high as Constantine got before I released the last arrow. Even though the wind increased slightly during my round, it was not enough to affect the arrow's flight. Every arrow had impacted the target in a wide grouping. When the last arrow landed in the dense straw of the dummy with a thud, the cheers resounded. I didn't like the looks that Constantine was giving me. My littermates mauled me with their hands and praised me like I was a hero. For today, I was such to them. Constantine went and retrieved my arrows as our group inspected their arrows and packed up their things. He returned and handed me my arrows. "Talk to me at dinner," he said seriously before leading us back up the hill to the castle on the bluff. I had counted Constantine as an ally, so I was confused by his tone and why he appeared so annoyed. Dinner was grilled fish and venison tonight with a spicy sweet glaze. The soldier cook was treating us because of all the extra meat the hounds had been bringing to the table. Even the ale was less watered down than usual. After the course of questions for everyone, I was without a reward once again, as Constantine's questions focused on hill giants and wyverns for me. Constantine sat in a quiet corner, and I joined him. His steely blue eyes seemed to be appraising me before he decided on his question, "What did you take out of the shimmering labyrinth?" "I don't understand," I replied cautiously. We were out of earshot of the others, and the nearby window let in the white noise of the ocean's waves crashing against the rocks. Constantine was irritated, and not hiding it. He leaned in closer to me and whispered, "You held back in our contest, and I'm not talking about your spell forms. Your archery was adequate in Maka, and now you're steadier with a bow than men who have been shooting for a decade. If I didn't know better, I'd guess an ancient elven warrior possessed you in the city, and is puppeteering you." I resisted saying, "You figured me out." Constantine's eyes were too serious, and he has a fascination with the undead. "My archery in Matcha was adequate?" I asked instead with an arched eyebrow. Constantine waved his arm dismissively, for the general army, not for a legionnaire. "What happened in the dungeon?" he pressed, but I didn't fail to notice his other hand was below the table, out of my sight, and that shoulder was tense. Constantine's curiosity was clearly eating him alive, and he had doubts that needed answering. I think the realization that I had surpassed him in swordsmanship was what triggered this unexpected meeting. So I focused on that. I spent a lot of time practicing in the dreamscape, and I had time to practice with the legionnaires at the Imperial Legion Hall. I even crossed blades with Primus Scorpio. Primus Scorpio, that pixie prick? You must have been at the morning sessions. Constantine let his loathing for the man bleed through in his words. His spell form is about predicting what his opponents do before they do it. I summarized what I gleaned from the encounter. Not a secret, and not his only spell form, but you are avoiding my question. The dreamscape fine, but you are faster, stronger, and much better conditioned. Did you find an artifact or a cache of apex essences? Maveth mentioned a few of the creatures you killed when talking to others in the company, but shut up after being pressed by Brutus. He focused on me like a truth-seeker. I tried to deflect, as was my inclination when someone delved into my secrets. Was the company sworn to secrecy on the location of the shimmering labyrinth? Constantine nodded. And its existence altogether. Keeping Matteo and Benito's mouths shut is Adrian's full-time job. I am sure others have talked as well, but we were allowed to keep our gains from the dungeon in return. I was worried someone might come after the company for the runic weapons, I said, concerned. It is a possibility, but Castile and Adrian are alert to it. If they were not quartered in a city now, I would be with them, Constantine admitted defensively. He did have some loyalty to the men and Castile. I am sure most dukes are aware of what Castile's company carries now, and it will filter down through the ranks of the first citizens. I expect Brutus and Dante will be gone when I return. They are too foolish to realize that all the first citizen wants is their runic weapons when they take them into service. But Brutus doesn't even have a runic weapon, I said, confused. Constantine chuckled, finally relaxing a little. And whatever first citizen he falls into the service of will be disappointed when he learns. He lacks one. Constantine refocused his eyes hard again. Enough banter. How have you grown so much so fast? Why does it matter? I replied defensively. Most can be attributed to that centaur's ass first citizen Boris trying to get his hands on your amulet. But Duke Tiberius wants you to serve as his granddaughter's personal bodyguard. Duke Octavian filed a formal request for your service after the Knoll Garden incident as well, but deferred to Duke Tiberius as a favor to him. Everyone else has too low standing to be even considered. If there are enough whispers, eventually your name will reach the Emperor's ears. Constantine's argument was compelling. He whispered harshly, "You need to stand out, not outshine all the other stars in the sky like the sun. You continue this path and you will be tested on a reader." He added the last as a veiled threat. I think he assumed I would be afraid of showing my magic affinities, but there was also a sizable increase in the potential for my physical and mental attributes. I nodded slowly in understanding that I should have held back some. Constantine relaxed visibly and continued. There are 3 men among the pups that you should be wary of. Truth-seeker Giannis didn't have the ether to question them more in depth. But Castian, Hadrius, and Savino were all sponsored by allies of first citizens Boris Angela and Justin Cicero. He paused for a moment. They were sponsored after your own reference was accepted to the Hounds. And you are just telling me this now, I said tersely. I have been keeping an eye on them, and you have been locking yourself in your room at night. We will be starting the hunts soon, so I thought you should be made aware, Constantine noted smugly. I rolled my eyes to show my irritation. The hunts? Constantine grumbled under his breath as I continued to sidestep his questions. Yes, we train you to track a man. 1 pup is released into the wild, and the rest have to find him in a 25-square-mile area. We marked the borders 2 days ago. With so few trainers, it is going to be hard to track all 17 of you. Normally, a hound is shadowing each pup. We lack that luxury, Constantine explained, exasperated at my unwillingness to answer his question. I needed to give him something to satiate his curiosity. I removed my glove and showed him my shiny silver ring, a ring of sustenance. I found it in the dungeon. It feeds off aether, and I only need a few hours of sleep and much less food. Constantine's eyes brightened as some understanding came to him. Put the glove back on. He eyed the back of a soldier washing plates. And it works in tandem with your amulet? I nodded. So you still have it then, Medusa's curse, Zyna, he said angrily. She was supposed to take it from you and promised to return it after your training. Constantine's mind was racing as his eyes darted at this complication. Finally he ordered, "Don't use it. Don't bring anything out of your space in front of the others, in fact. And I hope you didn't tell anyone you had it with you, for Saturn's sake." I had been careful, I said defensively. And wasn't he the one pressing me for answers right now? Constantine waved his hand, annoyed. You have Durandus Collector in there as well? I tried to maintain a stoic, impassive visage, but slowly nodded, admitting it. Constantine wasn't surprised. Gods above and below, I had to kill Flavius to keep that secret. If the opportunity arises during training, I will give you a window to use it. I was in shock at so many things he just said that I couldn't speak. Do you want some of the essences? I asked when I finally recovered. He chewed on the question. If you see fit to give me one, I wouldn't refuse. Seeing Maveith train this last month, I assumed you two had quite the harvest in the shimmering labyrinth. Maybe I underestimated how great a harvest. He rationalized my gains were solely from essences and started to stand, waiting for me to say something else. When I didn't, he added, always keep your secrets close. I thought I taught you better than this. He turned and left with a purposeful stride, and I think I was supposed to feel guilty. The soldiers doing dishes averted their eyes to their task as he climbed the stairs. I rose and descended to my cell. When I was in my room, I couldn't decide if Constantine was angry at me for not confiding in him, that I had surpassed his swordsmanship skill, or that I was showboating in front of the others. I ended up assuming it was a mix of all three. I took my 2 essences before settling in for the evening. Even though Constantine had told me not to use the amulet, I did keep to my routine but only spent enough time inside to create the tomes in the library. The next week was as Constantine had told me. The morning beach training was shortened as we just ran 2 miles to the salt flats and back. The salt flats were large, very shallow pools the soldiers filled with salt water. The sun evaporated the water, and the soldiers scraped the salt. The pools themselves were extremely old, from a long-forgotten empire. The soldiers sold salt for a little extra coin. My own taste for empire salt greatly diminished when I noticed the seabirds liked to bathe and defecate in the shallow water pools right after they were filled. I had thought salt came from salt mines, but the empire had no salt mines when I asked Hearn. And being surrounded on all sides by enemies meant importing rock salt was only doable by sea. I managed to restrain myself in combat practice. I never lost, but fought down to the level of my opponents. It was almost frustrating facing the other pups, as I was not getting any better from it. Constantine had chosen not to cross blades with me again, but Hearn and Jansen were willing. Both men relied on their speed in combat. Before the shimmering labyrinth, I would have been at a disadvantage against them. Now I assessed their skill at a step below Constantine. Seeing this, Constantine frequently had both men attack me at once. The two worked well together, and I usually gained a bruise or two after a contest against the pair. We started our tracking lessons in earnest as well in the afternoons. One hound would hide in the 25-square-mile zone, and we would all have to find him. At first they would leave obvious signs of passage, but got more and more devious and stealthy. When they started setting crippling traps, we learned this was no longer a game. I stepped on a concealed small pit and got 2 metal nails through my foot when I was sprinting after Cato in the low light. I cursed as Constantine didn't want me to heal in front of the others, and was forced to limp and find healer Lithe. Constantine was also right about Castian, Hadrius, and Savannah. They shadowed me under the pretense of staying close to the prodigy and constantly hinting that we should form a pact together for the hunts. Maybe it was Constantine's warning, but I sensed their duplicitous nature now. The most useful part of the day was Hearn's lectures on the creatures of Dizia. It felt like there was a never-ending stream of horrors that could kill you. Goblins, giants, elementals, owlbears, gnolls, dire animals, dryads, undead, giant insects, dragons, drakes, wyverns, gargoyles, trolls, troglodytes, ogres, pixies, golems, bugbears. The list seemed endless. Hearn had over 100 creatures he planned to educate us about. I wanted to follow up his lectures by reading my own bestiaries in my mind space for comparison, but I was limited to leaving notes from the lectures to review later. We finished archery practice against targets on a big rope swing. Hitting a moving target was magnitudes more difficult than hitting a stationary target. Still, with the slower swinging targets, I was accurate at 25 yards. Distances over 30 yards or with faster swinging targets, and my hit rate dropped considerably. Hearn told me it just took practice, and soon it would become instinct on where I would need to aim. Constantine suddenly stopped the lesson. Enough time with your bows. Retrieve your arrows. Everyone rushed as his tone indicated haste. As we were inspecting our retrieved arrows, Constantine roared, "It is time for your first pup hunt! Whoever catches the prey tonight gets tomorrow off!" Everyone was silent as we were told this was coming. The gleam in Constantine's eye told me I was not going to like his next words. "Tonight's quarry is Eric. You have a 2-minute head start. Starting now. Fuck you very much, old man." I shouldered my quiver and sprinted into the trees. All the hound trainers had been present at the archery lesson, so I knew none were hiding in the woods. As soon as I was out of sight of the others, I sent my bow, arrows, sword, and hound back into my space. The lighter I was, the faster I could move. If I remained free until sunset, I would be the winner. At least that is what I assumed, as we always ended our hunts of the hounds then, even if we didn't find them. We had spent the last few days tracking and hunting our hound instructors, so I was very familiar with the terrain. 2 minutes was not a lot of time to gain a lead on the others. Normally, the hounds were given 15 minutes, or they left in the middle of a lesson to enter the woods to set false trails, traps, and hide. Constantine only giving me 2 minutes was just Constantine being Constantine. As I ran, I intentionally left a trail, stepping on bloodgrass, leaving prints, and disturbing the leaves. I was faster than everyone, and I had a destination in mind. Constantine's warning that this was going to happen eventually kept me on the lookout for paths and routes. To my right was the hill that led up to the bluff where the castle resided, and to my left were the dense woods. As I ran, I spooked 2 deer and paused in my long stride. After getting lesson after lesson on the horrors of the world, racing recklessly alone through the woods was probably not very wise. My senses went into overdrive, searching for threats while my mind worked on my plan. One of the pups, Val, was a cheater. His spell form could divine the direction of an object that he had touched. It did not work on people, only objects, and had a range of about 1 mile. I hoped that he was trying futilely to find my bow or sword and cursing up a storm, thinking I was out of his range. Those were the only 2 objects he had touched of mine that I was aware of. But then again, before I learned of his ability and started watching him closer, he may have marked other items. I reached my first destination and smirked. A wide stream, about 20 feet across at this point, and waist-deep in the center. I raced out into the water, making air shields to step on while I crossed in 3 leaps. When I reached the other side, I switched from leaving an obvious trail to trying to leave no trail at all. There was rocky terrain headed up to the right that made stone hopping easy. I cursed as I stepped on and tore some moss from one of the rocks. I turned back and carefully folded it back in place before continuing. About 100 yards from the stream, the terrain changed to pine needles, and I switched into a flat-footed run on the pine needles. This area was a favorite of the hounds when they played the rabbit. If you didn't push off with your toes, you could avoid disturbing the pine needles, making it hard to be tracked. I was not great at the technique when running all out, but I did my best. I started to alter my course into an arching loop, following the boundary markers, placed every 100 yards, white circles on the trees. My plan would only work if all the pups followed my fake trail. They might spot me returning on this parallel route if they had spread out to cover the 5-mile-wide tract of land in the boundary. An hour into my long run, I kept the trees that marked the boundary to my right and was tempted to step outside to find out the consequences, but I decided to play fair. My mind turned as I ran. I had read the list of spell forms everyone had, and 2 other pups had spell forms good for tracking. Gaius could see in the dark, and Dirk had a heightened sense of smell that was not foiled by myconid powder. Those 2 had also come from the regular army and not the Legion. From what I understood, the hounds were desperate to replenish their ranks. Normally all hounds came from the Legion due to their superior fitness and combat skills, but I would say the soldiers selected from the army were picking up the tracking skills much faster than the legionnaires, even if they fell short in the combat training. I made the mistake of focusing on the left, where my pursuers would come from. A petrified green goblin shrieked and dashed away far to my right. We had seen goblin tracks, and the hounds had even killed a pair a few days ago. I grumbled as I turned and pursued, Orc's torment appearing in my hand as I closed. The goblin tried to scurry up a tree, but I caught it in the middle of the back with a powerful swing. It screamed balefully as it hit the ground, and I ended its pain quickly with a thrust to the throat. Shit! The little creature had been loud in its death scream. Looking where I was at, I was 50 yards outside the boundary. We were trained to kill the creatures whenever we encountered them, but I was certain Constantine would say I lost the contest because I had left the area. I listened for a moment, planning to risk using the collector. I heard a loud whistle, probably a mile away. Someone had heard the goblin's death cry, but was still far away. 15 seconds later, I had a minor essence of quickness and was running once again at full tilt. My hope was that they would find the encounter with the goblin, and that it would give them pause as they explored the scene of the fight. Maybe they wouldn't realize it was me who had killed it. Anyone with half a brain would be able to figure out my route. When Constantine introduced the boundary for the hunts, we were on the beach after a morning run. He had only laid out the right, left, and further markers, meaning the beach and castle were in play. I had planned to return to the castle and be enjoying a meal when the others found me after searching until sunset. Now I was rethinking my plans and thought maybe I should head down to the beach. A mile later, I slid to a stop, cursing as I reached the dirt road leading up to the castle. 2 soldiers were inspecting a wagon of supplies. No one had spotted me, and their backs were turned to me. They were over 80 yards away, but they were blocking my route. I wasn't sure if they would rat me out or not, so I waited. Minutes later, multiple whistles behind me told me they had found the goblin a mile back. A soldier turned in my direction at the sound, and I froze. At a distance, avoiding movement was the best way to remain unseen. I waited as he turned back and continued inspecting the wagon's cargo. It was painfully slow, and I was sweating in the cold afternoon air, wishing he would hurry it up. The wagon started to roll with the soldiers leading. I raced out into the road and snuck up behind the wagon. By the smell, it was provisions for the soldiers. The noise of the wagon covered my movement as I climbed over the back and pushed under the oiled canvas covering the wagon. Salted meat and vegetables, close to expiration, greeted me. I listened as we reached the gate. The soldiers ordered it open, and the wagon proceeded inside and the gates closed behind. Till Egg the wagon arrived. A week late and full of crops we need to pickle or risk losing, but at least it got here. Egg was the cook's nickname. I wasn't sure if it was because he was bald, or that he liked to crack raw eggs over his personal meals. The wagon stopped, and the teamster climbed off and stretched. I slid out the back unnoticed, and nearly walked into Egg as I was entering the castle. "Rough day?" he asked, smelling like grease. "Yeah. Constantine let me go early." Doubt creased his face, so I quickly added to avoid suspicion. "I doubt it was a favor, though. He probably has something sinister planned for the evening. The others should be along shortly." Egg sympathized as he had seen how we were treated and how hard we trained, hard man. That one. "I will see if I can add something special for dinner tonight from the delivery." He nodded and went to unload the wagon. 2 other soldiers were off watch in the common as I joined them, grabbing a mostly clean cup. I removed my heavy hound jacket and laid it on the back of my chair. Their pitcher had watered-down ale, and I spoiled their conversation as we all drank in silence for a time before they resumed talking about the best soil to plant cabbage, beets, and tomatoes in. The pair planned to farm after their time in the army was complete. I doubted the Emperor was going to release anyone from service anytime soon, but didn't spoil their conversation. It was over an hour before there was a commotion at the gate as I heard the pups returning. I had almost won the sun was going to set soon, and I just shook my head in disappointment as I listened to the pups talking. "I am positive this time. I got enough aether to use keen smell again. It smells like Eric passed this way recently." The guards at the gate didn't see him enter. An exasperated man lamented. "His scent could have been lingering here from the morning." Another pup joined the argument. "Isn't the castle out of the boundary?" "Who knows? He left the boundary to kill the goblin." "The man just doesn't care about rules. Why isn't he guarding a duke or duchess?" "I heard he was guarding a high mage, and she took a fancy to him, but he couldn't meet her expectations under the sheets. I heard he got sent to the Hounds because he took a duke's daughter's maidenhood." "That was Rion, you idiot." The truth-seeker forced a confession out of him. "Probably strung up by his balls by now. We'd better do something soon. Hearn and David are watching us. You two search the stables, and Dirk and I will search the cells." Dirk had the spell form for keen smell, so I knew the gig was up. Moments later, the 2 pups entered the common room and walked right past me. I was by the door and seated with 2 soldiers in common clothes. Both pups were wet from the waist down. I didn't have my hound jacket on but was still shocked when the 2 walked down the stairs, not even giving me a second glance. My drinking partners had resumed their conversation but asked, Are they looking for you? I nodded, and he held up his cup in a toast. I matched it and took a pull of my own. Dirk and Malcolm came up the stairs 40 minutes later, clearly distraught. The sun had set, and they lost. They started to head for the exit when Dirk punched Malcolm in the chest and pointed at me. I held up my mug in salute to congratulate them for finding me, albeit too late. Constantine was hiding his glee at dinner. 6 hours, he had a 2-minute lead, and it took you 6 hours to find him. He stormed around the common room as dinner was being served. Egg had added some sweet peppers and corn to tonight's stew. The corn was typically only ground into meal and lacked the sweetness I was accustomed to. Still, I nodded to him in appreciation when he handed me my bowl as Constantine continued his tirade at the other pups. Castian made the mistake of interrupting Constantine. He didn't stay in the boundary. The victory should be ours. Constantine spun on him and he flinched. Boundaries? Do you think your targets stay within boundaries? Disgusted, he announced. No one gets tomorrow off. That announcement had me angry, but I asked in stupefied confusion. I thought I had gotten tomorrow off. They didn't find me before sunset. Constantine whirled at me, but I didn't flinch. You obviously have trouble following rules. I think all 20 of my rocks need a new home along the boundary to serve as a reminder for you as to where they are. You can have tomorrow off, pup, but I want all 20 stones added to different tree markers. The others winced, and I just gave Constantine a hard stare. The message was clear. You could go outside the boundary but would pay a price for it. The task would be extremely easy for me. I could drop the stones in my dimensional space. I would only do one at a time to give the illusion my space was too small to take more. Constantine then started to review the hunt and what they had done wrong. When the group reached the water crossing, they had split into 3 groups, one crossing and one going left and the other going right. The group that went right had encountered an angry bull elk. Hearn and Cato had to intervene and take it down. That group had stopped the hunt in favor of harvesting the massive animal, which was rare this far north. The other 2 groups had remained clustered too long, waiting for someone to pick up my trail. Only with the grace of Dirk's sense of smell had they picked up my trail again. When they found the dead goblin, they argued over what had happened, wasting time. I listened as Constantine and the other hounds pointed out mistake after mistake. I was sure this would not be the last time I was selected to be the quarry, so I also listened, learned, and planned my next flight. It had been 3 weeks since I had been the rabbit for the first time. Since then, each pup had taken a turn, none as successful as I had been. Now we had switched to tracking the hounds individually to test our skills. This morning I had drawn Hearn. The game had changed slightly as well. We were given our healing and stamina potions, and the prey was allowed to fight back within reason. Hearn was good with a bow, and I knew he was probably leading me to a clearing. I pressed my hand to the ground, melting the thin layer of frost that had formed overnight, and sent out a pulse with earth speak. I had gotten good at interpreting the feedback, eliminating everything below ground, and narrowing my focus. I could clearly see Hearn's trail of footprints across the pine needles under the tree. My earth speak highlighted each footprint in detail for me. Hearn had climbed a tree and swung a good 20 feet away at a right angle to his trail before continuing. I pulled the spider's silk glove back on and flexed my calloused hand. I knocked my own arrow on my bow and crouched as I moved silently, using the trees for cover. We had replaced the silver heads with soft-fired clay. The heads crumbled on impact, and the shaft could not penetrate our hound armor. They did leave a nasty welt, as I had found out from Constantine's demonstration on me. I paused as I sensed something wrong. I couldn't figure out what it was. I just felt something was not right after so many pursuits. I really needed to find a way to activate my earth speak easier. I only got fuzzy images when I tried it on trees. Touching the ground was the best way, but I got the same fuzzy image when I tried to use it through my boots. Walking barefoot was not an option, even though it worked well. Being in contact with stone or earth always gave me the best feedback. Removing my glove constantly was becoming an annoyance, and put me at risk of being seen in the act. No one knew I had the earth speak ability. I stood behind a boulder and sent out an earth pulse. That bastard Hearn was hiding inside a crevice 30 feet ahead. He had his bow knocked as well, waiting. He knew about my air shield, so he needed to surprise me. By his position, he had circled back and was going to attack me from behind after I passed. I sighed as this was going to hurt. I followed the difficult trail he left and listened for movement, my ears focused on where I knew Hearn was hiding. At the first sound of the bow twang, I dodged right but was still caught in the shoulder blade. "Disabling shot," Hearn announced flatly. He stood and approached while I worked out the pain in my arm. "You found me fast, Eric. Faster than any other pewpound, faster than most hounds could." "I still lost," I said, rubbing my shoulder. How was I supposed to avoid being surprised? I indicated his perfect hiding spot 20 feet away. Hearn shrugged. "You sensed something. Your bow was ready. You are getting closer, closer than the others. It is another level of awareness." He paused to think. "For me, it is like a wrongness is hanging in the air, whispering to me. And no, it is not a spell for more intuition. For others, their senses suddenly become heightened. For others, their heart races for no reason. It is your subconscious telling you danger is near. You need to recognize it for what it is." We started walking back to the archery range, and were the first to return. Constantine arched an eyebrow, and the other hounds practicing paused to look. "That was rather abrupt. He didn't fall for any of my false trails," Hearn stated. "He is as good as any hound I know at tracking. I still put an arrow in him." Hearn managed a brief smirk at winning the contest. Constantine nodded and tossed me a lesser healing potion, which I pretended to put in my belt. "Don't praise him. His head is already big enough," Constantine rebuked good-naturedly. "Val, you are next. Hearn, you have 50 minutes lead." There was a look between the two men, and Constantine added, "You can start after Hearn gets some water." The trainers were not exempt from Constantine's constant pushing. Arrows thudding on targets resumed, and I rested a bit. Keeping my spell forms hidden from the others was becoming a burden. The Empire was also heavily invested in training the hounds. Constantine handed out at least 20 lesser healing potions every day now. At a market price of 5 gold each, this type of training was expensive. The other pups complained that the potions tasted like vinegar and spoiled cabbage, and I knew that was because they were close to expiration, looking at the wax seals. Still, the alternative of healing naturally was not an option, as it would slow the training. The orcs, elves, and Barteradians seemed to be laying low for the unusually mild winter. But spring was coming. Hearn took off at a jog a few minutes later. When 15 minutes had passed on Constantine's hourglass, he released Val. I stood and took my position at 50 paces from the swinging targets, switching to a quiver of practice arrows. The targets were now much smaller, having gone from man-size to shield size. We were supposed to hit it at the top and bottom of both pendulum swings. It took me 5 arrows to finish my round, with my first arrow going low by a few inches, and my fourth clipping the bag and tumbling into the woods. I added my other 8 arrows into a stationary target set at 100 paces, missing high on the first shot. As I waited for the others to finish and retrieve my arrows, Cato came running into camp. I moved closer to Constantine to overhear, found an ogre trail, followed it, and a female and male are about 2 miles outside the boundary to the south. Dirk, Cato's pursuer, jogged into camp shortly after, and I guessed their hunt had been cancelled. Constantine thought momentarily, "What are they doing so far north?" "They hate these cold winters. Maybe the milder temperatures this year. We could always ask them. But I never knew ogres to be great conversationalists," Cato retorted smartly. Constantine just grunted and reached for his whistle. He blew twice, causing 2 piercing chirps in the cold air, ending today's practice. The whistles were repeated as the message was relayed through the woods. 30 minutes later, everyone returned from their hound and rabbit game. "The hunts are called off today. The pups have the rest of the day off except you and you." I didn't even need to look to see Constantine pointing at me. The other pup selected was Dirk. "You're going to join us on an ogre hunt." That pronouncement stirred the group of pups. A few requested to come. Constantine's sharp look told them not to ask again. After the pups collected the arrows and extra gear and headed back to the castle, Hearn took the lead. "If you remember from the lesson, ogres are best dealt with at range. You almost never encounter more than one in the wild. Unless it is a pregnant female, the male remains with her, foraging and hunting for her, until she gives birth. The ogre newborn is the size of a man and can walk after just a day. The mother will teach it to forage for around 3 months and then leave it to fend for itself. As was his custom to correct Hearn, Cato added, "The grey ogres of the Isles do form small tribes, and are a little smarter but only prefer hot climates." Hearn grunted, but nodded in agreement. Constantine focused on Dirk and me. "You two have decent skills at moving silently and are the best trackers among the pups. Consider this bonus training. Remain at range and only join after we start our attack. We will be targeting the head and genitalia of the male, and just the head of the female. You can put 20 arrows into the torso of an ogre, and it will not slow it down. If you have to fight it in melee, get behind it and try to cut the ankle tendon to immobilize it." Dirk was nervous and asked, "Just 7 of us. It's an ogre. Shouldn't more of us be going? If the encounter was in the open, maybe? With trees for cover, we have the advantage of surprise. Half of you pups still cannot move silently, and I don't want to risk our lives protecting you. If you get spooked or chased, run north as fast as your legs can carry you." Constantine then laid out the plan for surrounding the 2 ogres once we found them. This was more for Dirk's and my benefit, as the Hounds were practiced in hunting ogres. They were uncommon monstrosities, and eradicating them was as difficult a task as eradicating gnolls. It was decided that Constantine was going to take the first shot, targeting the male. Then everyone else would join him as it focused on him. With luck, someone would get an arrow into its eye. It was expected the pregnant female would flee once the fight began. The only time an ogre didn't relish combat was when it was with child or protecting a kill. As we were racing south following Cato, the Hounds fanned out, keeping Dirk and me in the center. It was a controlled pace, but we covered the ground rapidly. After 7 miles, the Hounds slowed around us, and I could smell a hint of the foulness in the air. The Hounds converged on us, conversing in whispers. "They are close less than half a mile." "Eric, read the tracks," Constantine ordered. I looked at the ground, and the frost had disappeared, but it was easy to see the massive creature's prints in the frozen earth anyway. I took my time, following the tracks for a while before announcing my findings. 2 bipedal humanoids. One urinated over there, and they are walking. "Maybe an hour old," Constantine nodded in mild praise. "Good, but by the smell of that urine, the tracks are about half an hour old. Dirk, use your spell form to confirm." Dirk's eyes were already watering from the pungent urine nearby, and when he used his spell form, he immediately vomited loudly. I could only imagine what his enhanced sense of smell had detected. "Move," Constantine hissed angrily, and the other Hounds spread out. "Dirk, get some distance and regain yourself." Constantine's voice was full of disappointment. "Hopefully, they were too far away to hear you lose your breakfast." Constantine moved off, and I joined him. The twang of a bow off to our right had Constantine swear. Fortuna's cursed luck. Other bows sang in the forest, and a child's voluminous, pained roar echoed, spooking a pair of owls into flight. I could see an ogre through the trees now, and felt it as it thundered through the woods at its attacker. Constantine drew and released, scoring an arrow in its thigh. I think he had been aiming for the swinging member between the legs, but missed. He grunted in dismay. "Hearn is going to lead it this way. Keep an eye out for the female," he told me, tracking the male ogre with his bow. I could see Hearn flitting through the trees and tracked my line of sight back to where the ogre had come from. Another ogre head popped up and was looking around from a gully. It had a rabbit in its mouth. "I see it. It looks like it is going to run." "Shadow it if it moves," Constantine ordered. He then started moving off to assist Hearn, who was pulling the male ogre in a line for the other Hounds to get unobstructed shots. I saw other Hounds moving with him deep in the trees as arrows zipped toward the target, most connecting. The ogre already had 6 arrows in it, blood dripping from other punctures where it had pulled other arrows out. As long as the ogre didn't catch any of them, it was clear the Hounds would take it down, as it would bleed to death from the poison. The female thought the same thing and started running in the opposite direction. I cursed as I pursued it. When I reached the gully, it was full of churned earth, and 2 rabbit heads were discarded nearby. Trailing an ogre from a distance is not something I enjoyed, as its unpleasant odor hung in the air. I moved to my left to avoid the foul wake. The ogre made it a mile before it stopped, panting for breath, probably not used to the exercise. It turned, and its bloated belly was easy to discern. Other than the bloated belly and missing anatomy, it looked just like a male. I surmised ogres did not nurse their young. I paused with the ogre as she scanned the trees for pursuit. Her eyes passed over me twice before she settled on me. I had been still, and only my head was visible, but she had still located me. Her black eyes studied from 50 yards, deciding if I was a threat. The cries of futility from her mate still sounded in the distance. She unearthed a rock and threw it at me. It shattered a modest trunk nearby, spraying bark, but wasn't even close to my position. I decided to practice my archery. None of my arrows were prepared with hound poison. I targeted her eyes, and my arrow thudded just below the rolls of fat on her chin. I didn't get much penetration through the tough skin and fatty tissue, but it caused her to panic and cry loudly for her mate. An anguished cry was returned, and soon I could hear the male crushing through the forest toward me. The female thought it was a good time to attack me with more rocks, forcing me to take cover. I didn't think my air shield could stop one of the head-sized stones directly. With my back to the female, I was given full view of the ogre crashing toward me, with a dozen arrows in it and blood coating much of its rippling flesh. It was running on adrenaline, an instinct to save its mate. My peripheral vision could see the hounds trailing the quarry further behind. As the ogre closed, the rocks stopped coming, leaving me with little recourse. When the thundering creature got within 15 feet, I removed a portion of its brain. I dodged as it crashed to the earth, the pin-cushion of arrows snapping as it rolled to a stop. At point-blank range, I drew my bow and put an arrow in its eye to explain my victory. The thuds of footsteps alerted me the female had decided to rush me. With my ether bottomed out, I tossed my bow to safety and drew my blade as I sprinted toward the hounds to regroup. A large rock slammed into my calf, crushing my leg and causing me to tumble through dead leaves. I fumbled for a prepared vial in my pocket and smashed it on a nearby rock. A cloud of noxious gas erupted in the air as all 3 pellets inside combusted with the air. I closed my eyes, held my breath, and dragged myself out of the cloud. The female bellowed as her momentum carried her into the cloud, and she inhaled deeply. The blindness spores and sneezing spores were doing their work quickly. Constantine was standing over me protectively, firing his bow into the cloud. Soon Hearn, David Cato, and Jansen joined him. The ogre wailed and swung her arms futilely, searching for me as arrow after arrow hit her. Out, Hearn barked. Soon, David and Cato mirrored his call, letting the others know they had no arrows remaining. Constantine took my quiver off me and continued the assault. The female finally ran blindly out of the smoke, quickly tripping over a log. Constantine moved closer and for a better angle. He soon had an arrow in the female's eye, and she stopped struggling soon after. Only the exhausted, adrenaline-fueled breaths of the hounds could be heard as we all listened for additional threats. I examined my leg, pulling up the blood-soaked leggings. The bone was showing, and it was at the wrong angle. "Can you heal yourself?" Constantine asked in a detached voice, but concern was in his eyes. I shook my head in the negative as I was dealing with the pain rushing in as my shock faded. He grunted and retrieved a greater healing potion from his belt. "Drink this after I align the bone." I nodded and waited while he straightened the leg. My vision fuzzed with the pain, but I remained conscious. I took the potion and felt the cool wash of healing ether focus on the wound, pulling the bone and fragments into their proper place. I let off a relieved sigh when the most painful part of the healing was complete. The other hounds stood around us as they looked at the carnage, and my lucky shot into the male's eye. When they finished their examination, Cato asked curiously, "What was that cloud?" The other hounds were paying close attention as well. "I shattered 3 pellets on that rock over there. Smoke, blindness, and sneezing pellets," I answered truthfully. Constantine and Hearn went over to examine the glass and residue. Hearn nodded appreciatively, and Constantine just arched an eyebrow at me. Smart keeping them inside a glass vial. Jansen commented, "It is not going to be fun retrieving our arrowheads," Constantine grunted. "Eric can do it as penance for making us use a greater healing potion on him." I looked up at him, anger boiling up. "I will stay with him while he does." He winked at me conspiratorially. causing my anger to fade. The others were used to Constantine picking on the pups, and me slightly more often than the others. Soon, the others were off to collect Dirk, leaving me with Constantine. As my ether recovered, I channeled my healing spell form to finish the healing on my leg. Can you remove the arrowheads with your dimensional space? I can, but I need to recover my aether. Do you want me to use the collector first? I asked, standing and testing my repaired leg. Constantine scanned the trees. Give it a few minutes. David has been asking questions of you recently. I nodded. Where did you get the pellets? He asked curiously. I made them myself in Zyna's alchemy lab, I replied, sitting on a log. Zyna hates alchemy, Constantine replied skeptically, which is why she let me use the Chancellor's alchemy lab. I was bored. I studied my bloodied leggings, my sock annoyingly soaked with blood as well. Do you have more? Constantine said while standing over the female. The stomach of the creature was moving as the unborn ogre was suffocating inside the womb with its mother dead. A few, I said, as I produced the collector. Constantine studied it and shook his head in disbelief at actually seeing it. Do you want some? I offered. Perhaps. They tend to break at the most inopportune time. The hounds rarely carry them anymore. You should use it soon. No need for the creature to suffer. He indicated the panicking ogre child. It feels wrong. It will never have a chance for life, I said as I placed the collector and activated it. That ogre would grow up and happily chew on your bones given a chance, Constantine said unsympathetically. The blue smoke was thick, as I think it pulled essence from both the mother and child. A major empathy essence formed, which only made me feel more guilty. Shortly later, the male formed a major power essence, and Constantine handed me my discarded bow. How long to collect the arrowheads? My eyes were watering from the smell, and I didn't want to remain close to the ogres, but I had no choice. It took me an hour to pull chunks of flesh out and deliver them to Constantine to retrieve the arrowheads a distance away. As we walked back to the castle, Constantine found 3 more arrows that had missed their mark. Do you want an essence? I finally asked. If you are offering, he said impassively. I passed him the power essence and consumed the empathy essence myself. Constantine consumed the essence and muttered a soft, thank you. I felt a little dizzy as the essence worked. It had been some time since I consumed an essence. I had used everything in my dimensional space with the exception of the 2 apex water essences. I was not in a position to unlock a new affinity at the moment. We reached the boundary markers. We continued in silence. Constantine broke the silence after a time. Cornelius and Sergius will be coming out in a few weeks to select which of the litter they want. Does that mean our training is almost complete? I inquired. Those 2 centurions ran the Hounds in the 2 halves of the empire, and Cornelius was responsible for training all the Hounds. We will keep you as long as we can. Training is usually closer to 7 months, but spring will be here in 3, and I expect the orcs and elves to move then, Constantine said bitterly. After some time, thinking about the implications, I asked, how are you certain I will be sent to the archives eventually? Sergius is unflinchingly loyal to the Emperor. He usually has 6 hounds guarding the archives. You need to prove you are just as loyal a dog to the Emperor as he is. There are also plans in motion to make sure some of those guarding the archives will be required elsewhere, Constantine muttered distastefully. It sounded to me like the conspiracy was going to involve removing some hounds. We reached the castle, and the guards steered clear of us. When we entered the common room, jeers and complaints were shouted at us to go bathe from the others. Constantine's hard gaze silenced the dissenters as we received our dinner from A. Just another typical day in the life training to be a hound. I lay in my cell, reeking of ogre. Not as bad as Matteo had been in Maca, but persistent enough to irritate my eyes in the small room. The tide was high and the surf crashed against the bluff below the window, but it did little to circulate the air. I secured my door before entering the dreamscape. I planned to spend longer inside tonight than usual. After adding to the library, I researched ogres in my bestiaries. Everything Hearn had noted was true. I also learned that ogres' stench not only resulted from their hatred of bathing, but also from special glands. It was a defense mechanism to deter larger predators. The text did not specify what predators would target a 10-foot, 700-pound ogre node that I wanted to know. I found what I was looking for, a recipe for eliminating the scent. It was a simple alchemy recipe: vinegar, ash from a birch tree, and powdered lilac stamens. The lilac stamens were used as a catalyst for the ether and sapphire dust. You then add this mixture to boiling water with cloves. For someone skunked, you could use a tub of warm water and add the potion to it. The result was the removal of all scents from the clothes and the person. Unfortunately, lilacs were out of season, and there were no herbalists at the castle. According to the text, I would have to deal with the stink for 1 to 2 weeks. I switched books to review the spell form for Purify Self. I was on the verge of learning the Void Affinity spell form. It had been a slower process than I would have liked. After 20 minutes of studying the text, I exited the dreamscape. I touched the wall and sent out an earth pulse. I was immediately on alert as 2 men were outside my door, peering through the cracks in the aged and rotting door into my dark cell. It was a bit harder to discern their identities with earth speak, but after scrutiny, I was certain it was Gaius and Castian. Gaius could see in the dark, and I was certain Castian had recruited him to see if I was using the amulet. If they had forced open the door, the string on the pulley I had set up would have pulled it from my grasp, waking me. It was also concealed on the far side of my body. I sent the amulet to my space and pretended to roll over, facing away from the door while I watched the two using earth speak. As I moved, they slipped away like peeping toms on the verge of being caught. It confirmed that Constantine was right. I tracked their retreat to their rooms and planned to be a bit tougher on the two during weapons practice. 4 days later, those who had kept their distance from Constantine and me started to interact with us normally as the ogre's scent had diminished. We had assembled in the bailey, Cato announcing today's lesson. "It's time to give you your 2 poisons for your arrows." On a table in front of him were neat rows of 3 jars. Each jar was made of a different colored glass, 1 black, 1 red, and 1 clear. To his right, there was also a pile of flat, circular stones, black, dark gray, and crimson red. For the paralytic poison, the black fletchings. He held up a black vial. The dark gray fletchings indicate no poison. I looked at my quiver. 5 black, 5 red, and 3 gray arrows, Cato continued. Adding poison to an arrowhead is done in the following manner. First, heat the sealant wax. He took the clear vial and added it to the top of a thermal stone. You could see the white opaque wax quickly melt and turn clear. He took an arrow with a black fletching and touched it to the stone, heating the silver head. With the arrowhead heated, you place 3 drops on each side of the central groove. It will pool and dry in the grooves quickly on the heated arrowhead. Then dip the head into the wax. He did the procedure as he spoke. Hearn added from over Cato's shoulder, "Make sure you go straight down and up in the wax." I know too many hounds who have spilled their wax on assignment. It is not candling wax, but alchemy sealant wax. Very difficult to get outside of cities. Cato grunted at Hearn's addition. The 2 trainers constantly corrected each other in a contest of who knew more. Cato continued the lesson. "I suggest you replace the sponge moss at the bottom of your quiver, if you have the opportunity to do so when coating your arrows. A few hounds," his eyes pointed at Hearn, "don't do it often enough, and their arrowheads rattle in their quiver, removing the wax and poison. You also cannot use normal fire to heat the silver arrowheads. It will get them too hot and burn out the poison's efficacy. So don't lose your lesser thermal stones. Replacements will come from your own coin." Constantine stepped up to finish the lesson. "A waxed, poison-tipped arrow will be viable for 3 days. If you cut yourself with the bleeding poison, drink your lesser healing potion immediately. Otherwise, all wounds on your body will bleed freely for 3 hours." I nodded as I realized the ogre we had killed days ago had been poisoned. He looked to make sure everyone understood. "If you don't have a healing potion, wrap the wounds tightly to prevent blood loss until they clot normally." Then, it was time for us to do our own arrows. The thermal stones were extremely warm to the touch, a low-grade stone, but it was still our first artifact as a hound. I quickly completed my arrows and carefully placed them in my quiver. Hearn was over my shoulder. "Seal your vials with the wax. It will help extend the life of the poison." I sealed the vials, noting the poisons only had a 3-month expiration date. I sent all 3 and my new lesser thermal stone to storage. He patted my shoulder, realizing I actually didn't need to seal my vials. He offered some other advice. The thermal stone will be your best friend on cold nights. Wrap it in some spare clothes, as it is just hot enough to burn the skin if it is applied for a long time. Val and Savino did spill their wax, even though they had been warned, coating their thermal stone and making a mess of their table. They were given new wax vials and got chastising comments from our trainers. Each vial was good for about 30 arrows. Once everyone was finished practicing, Constantine stood in front of us, hand on his hips. He shook his head disapprovingly, like he didn't like what he saw or we didn't match his expectations of being a hound. I hope you enjoyed your luxury accommodations. It is time for you to put your skills to use. There are 18 of you. You are going to be divided into 3 teams of 6. Hearn and Cato will go with one team. David and Jansen will go with the other team, and I will supervise the 3rd team. I heard Malcolm whispering to himself, "Please, not Constantine," over and over. I was already certain he would be selecting me. Constantine announced the teams. Castian, Hadris, Savino, Val, Dirk, and Malcolm are with Hearn and Cato. Malcolm let out a relieved yes. I noted my 3 conspirators were placed in the same group. Gaius, Eric, Caspar, Bacchus, Sigma, and Moxie are with me, Constantine announced. Depending on how you do well on the foray will determine which artifacts you will be given, so show your best skills. Everyone started to murmur in excitement like kids before Christmas. Constantine barked over the noise. My group has 15 minutes to grab your things. Stacks of 30 ration bars are in the common room for each of you. Bacchus asked in disbelief, "How long are we going for?" "As long as it takes," Constantine said with a satisfied grin. I knew Constantine meant we only had 15 minutes and not a minute longer, and I rushed down to my room to grab my pack. The summoner's belt was still curled inside. I rushed up to the kitchen. An egg pointed at one stack of ration bars that looked like there was an extra row in the stack. I nodded my thanks and swept 36 ration bars into my dimensional space. Soon my group was chasing Constantine through the woods. Gaius and Moxie, left flank. Bacchus and Caspar, right flank. Eric and Sigma with me in the center. We fanned out according to Constantine's orders. We jogged until sunset, heading far to the south. Constantine had us make camp inside a deep cave. It wasn't long before a freezing rain began to fall outside. As we made camp, Bacchus broke the silence. "What are we hunting?" Constantine grunted. "Goblins, and whatever else we can find." "What does that mean?" Gaius asked pleadingly. He always looked constipated during Hearn's lectures, clearly regretting joining the Hounds. "Exactly what it means. Get some rest. Eric and I will split the watch." All eyes turned to me, thinking Constantine was punishing me again for some unknown slight, but I just shrugged. I took the first watch, looked over the group, and noted their spell forms. Gaius could see in the dark, and had been spying on me a few days ago. Caspar had flaming hands, and the lightened self-spell forms. The latter allowed him to reduce his body weight and do impressive acrobatics. Sigma was the quietest person I had ever met. I don't think he had said a single word in the last 5 weeks. He had also never demonstrated his spell form, but I knew it was discern truth according to the sheet I copied from the Truth Seeker. To his credit, I never felt my bone inscriptions itch in his presence. In my opinion, he was just an average soldier, despite coming from the Legion. Bacchus had the spell form for duplicate image. It was a low-tier illusion spell, leaving a man-sized illusion behind. He liked to leave copies of himself behind as a joke, but since they were not animated, it was easy to tell they were fake. Moxie had a lightning bolt spell form. Well, lightning bolt was too strong a word for it. It was more of a lightning dart. He also only had enough aether to use it twice. It was effective as it burned and caused the opponent to violently twitch, as Castian had found out in weapons practice after irritating Moxie 1 too many times. Constantine came in the middle of the night to relieve me. The rain was still falling heavily and freezing on the ground. He sat next to me. "You are going to be asked to do things you may not agree with." I turned to face him. "Like what?" He sighed heavily. "When Centurion Sergius takes you, he will test you. I can't prepare you for it. Do it and don't argue. Silence your conscience." He pulled a stone from his pocket and handed it to me. I turned it in my hand in the limited light, seeing reflections of runic writing. "What is this?" I asked. "Store it. It is an anchor stone paired with another. With it, Zyna will be able to send you messages. Only check it 1 hour after sunset," he said heavily. I got a little excited. "She will send me a message every night?" Constantine hissed. "No, fool. She might not send you a message for a year. It will be only one-way communication, and she will relay what you need to do in Sergius' service." After I digested the statement, I asked, "I thought I was to stand sentry on a border." Constantine shook his head. "All instructors do evaluations of the pups. I can control what Hearn and Jansen put into their evaluation of you, but the others are outside my influence. When Sergius and Cornelius arrive, they will review the litter and take turns selecting. Most likely, there will be 3 packs of 5 and 3 lone wolves from your group. Cornelius has the first selection, and will choose a pack instead of you. Sergius should select you next if he has half a brain." I sat there, not moving for a time, before Constantine told me, "Get some rest." Constantine had the only map in our group, and we took turns orienteering on it. For the next 2 weeks, we scouted water sources for tracks, and worked to track 9 green goblins to their burrows. We usually waited till sunset when they emerged and killed them at range. We also found other tracks. A hill giant's tracks, over a week old. A herd of centaur tracks. Constantine guessed 4 of the horsemen were running somewhere. Large bears, elk, and boar as well. But we did not follow them. Most creatures were wisely hibernating during the cold winter. Hearn had also been right about the thermal stone. It was most welcome during the freezing nights to warm the various parts of your body under the thin bedroll the hounds used. We were forced to forage and hunt game as we ran out of food. I pretended to be suffering with the others but didn't feel the pain or the hunger. Toward the end of the 4th week, we arrived at a large foreboding cave, and Constantine had us take cover a distance away. The entrance howled as musty-smelling air escaped the cave, giving it an ominous feeling. "That is an entrance to the endless dark," Constantine announced. Gaius asked in a confused tone, "I thought they were only in the mountains." Constantine shook his head, disappointed. "Don't believe everything you read in storybooks. There are 4 known entrances in the Telian Empire to the depths. This is one of them. This is the reason we can't eradicate the gnolls, ogres, and goblins. More eventually venture up from the endless dark. Why don't we just seal the entrances?" Moxie asked a good question. "Another entrance would appear elsewhere, and to my it always does. It is better to know where they are. The Legion used to guard them, but now the Hounds check on them intermittently, and they are far from populations. Gaius, go and look for tracks." Constantine's order had Gaius look like he had been stabbed in the back. Still he obeyed and moved away from us. He slowly crept around the entrance for an hour before returning. He was covered in sweat despite the cold temperature when he rejoined us to report. "A few goblin tracks. Only one set is fresh, though. Maybe a day old." Constantine nodded. "Probably in exile. We will track it down and then head to Sierra." "We will track it down and then head to Sierra." Expectant and hopeful eyes turned to Constantine. "I am tired of smelling you pups every day. You will be given leave to bathe and rest for 2 days to take care of your needs. The others should meet us there, and we will continue your training in the city." "What about the artifacts?" Sigma boldly asked. Constantine smiled tightly at his eagerness. "I will consult with the other hounds, and we will decide who has earned what we have to distribute." It was still a week before we reached the city of Sierra, and we hunted down 3 more goblins. One burrow also had 4 goblin newborns. Moxie was tasked with handling them. Sierra was not an impressive city, and I passed through it when we returned with the alchemist to Sobral. Sobral was about 150 miles east, in fact. I wondered how Ginger was doing in my absence. I had a lot of dungeon apples for her if we ever reunited. We moved through the gates, and the city guard gave us a wide berth due to the Hounds uniform we wore and our smell. Even I was reluctant to bathe in an ice-cold pond. The city was mildly active, and a few vendor carts were on the streets. Instead of the Legion Hall, we followed Constantine to an abandoned army barracks. "Drop your gear. We have the baths to ourselves for the next 4 hours. The packs of the other pups were already here as we were the last to arrive." Constantine grunted on seeing the beds. "One is missing." I counted the packs, and it was true. Only 11 of the bunks had packs claiming them. Our tired group dropped everything and made our way to the baths to find the other pups and hounds already soaking. Young boys took our hound clothing to clean, and we washed ourselves in the cold showers before joining them in the hot soaking pool. It didn't take me long to figure out the missing man was Riot. I heard one of the other pups telling Casper what had happened. Last week he was alone on night watch. We were a day's travel from seeing the entrance to the endless dark. He screamed a warning, waking us, but when we went to reinforce him, he was gone. Nothing left but a few drops of blood. Janssen, on the other side of the pool, confirmed the tale and warned, he was taken by something from the air as there were no tracks. He failed to remember not to stand sentry in the open on nights when Neptune's tear is absent. The loss of one of the men we had trained with kept everyone somber as we soaked and whispered our adventures. Constantine had a surprise for us after the bath. Nondescript commoner's clothing. You have 2 days to enjoy the offerings of the city. There are 10 silver in each vest. On the morning of the 3rd, we will resume your training with tracking in the city and the dangers that infest the shadows. The men scattered like leaves on the wind, and so did I. I had a few things I wanted that I hoped this small city might provide me.